If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What terrifying stranger, scary or creepy person did you encounter in the woods, trails or outdoors that made you run for your life?
A scary encounter in the Flagstaff Forest. This is not my story, this is a story my dad told me, and it is real. I still remember the look on his face when he told me. A little backstory. I come from a line of outdoorsmen and hunters, so my whole family loves the outdoors. My dad grew up hunting in the Arizona desert, where we still live, so he did not know how to navigate the forest landscape. When my dad was about 10, he went to the cabin of a family hunting friend. While everyone else was setting up, my dad went exploring because that had been the first time he had been to the forest. He was used to the heat of the Sonoran. Now don't get me wrong, my dad is a smart guy and can really find his way around places, but he was 10 years old. Of course, he got lost in the vast pine forest of Flagstaff, Arizona. He started to really freak out and panic. He had really wandered off. He then found a small cabin in a tiny clearing. He sprinted towards the cabin for help. Right when he ran past the thick trunk of a pine tree, an unknown stranger popped out and put a gun to his forehead. My dad can still remember the pistol. It was a nickel-plated S&W 44 Magnum long hunting revolver with a scope. The strange mountain man then pulled the hammer back on the revolver and said with an angry voice, "Who the duck are you?" My dad froze. They stood there for about 20 seconds before my dad could choke out these words. "I'm lost, sir. I'm staying at the Carlson's cabin." The man looked at him for about 30 seconds and quickly holstered his pistol. Still angrily glaring at my 10-year-old father, he said, "Just follow that path, and you will eventually find the cabin. Now get the duck out of here. And don't let me catch you ducking around on my property again." Right when the man finished that statement, my dad broke out in a full sprint and booked it back to the cabin, on the path. When my dad got back to the cabin, he was too scared to tell Mr. Carlson or even his son, who was about the same age. When he got home, he finally told his dad, or my grandpa. My grandpa was so mad he wanted to drive to Flagstaff and shoot the crazy-ass mountain man. Metal spikes on a trail. So, encountering this person has altered my life to the extent that I won't walk outside my house and my immediate area anymore. Nothing actually happened to me, but this is a devil in the diner type scenario. I was walking on a recreation trail near my home, as I have many times before. It's used by locals to get to a park, and normally, I run into retirees out on a walk or neighborhood kids on their bikes. It runs behind homes, so it's not remote, but it's also not directly within eyesight of the homes for most of the trail. Although I have never felt scared while using the trail, I always remain aware of my surroundings. I usually go for a walk in the morning, but for some reason, I decided to take a walk around 2 p.m. instead on this day. I had gone to the park and was on my way home. The trail was totally deserted, but I see this guy running towards me from the main road near my home. From far away, he looks like a normal jogger, but as he gets closer, I realize he is dressed in a metal outfit covered in spikes. What the F? There were 4-inch spikes coming off his shoulders, and he had Wolverine-style metal claws on. The sound of the outfit was of heavy metal jingling, so it wasn't a silly Halloween outfit or something. This was straight up heavy gear. As he got closer still, I noticed that he was completely pale and sweating profusely. His long black hair was damp with sweat, and his eyes were empty and staring straight forward. My heart dropped to the ground, and I was legit panicking. I felt so helpless, and if he decided to do something, I felt like I wasn't going to survive. I have never felt that starkly afraid for my safety in my life. He ran past as though he hadn't seen me at all, thankfully. I was shaking, but I made it home okay and thought about it. I didn't like the idea of stopping my walks because of this, but I was seriously considering it. Later that week, I was driving to get groceries and saw him again on the main road, running and wearing the same outfit. He clearly lives near me, so I decided to stop taking those walks and brought my treadmill out from the basement. I now drive to a different park to walk outdoors if I want to. I try not to be super judgmental about people, and for years, I was a metalhead and knew lots of alternative people. This is different. I guess I'd encourage people to listen to their gut when they feel this way about someone. Stay safe out there. Midnight ski in the woods. This was a few years back when I used to smoke the reefer. I was under 21, so weed was the natural go-to for my friends and me, even though I get pretty paranoid from it. One random night in mid-January, which was probably a Tuesday, my buddy and I decided to go smoke at the Metro Parks. The Metro Parks are a large natural reservation link of forest that lines many Cleveland, Ohio, suburbs. Within the several square miles of the Metro Parks, people can bike, horseback ride, fish, etc. During the day it's beautiful. At night, however, the metro parks are officially closed, with the only deterrents to keep scumbag teens and the like out being the 2 or 3 park rangers that patrol the vast land. Being a natural reservation with absolutely no electricity, when nighttime falls, the place is dark. So, being the bored stoners we were, my buddy Jerry and I decided to smoke up and walk to a location in the parks called Squaw Rock. It's an awesome location down by a river and is a great place to take a date or just hang out with friends outdoors. From the nearest parking lot, you still need to walk or hike about 15 minutes to get there. We park my SUV and look for the trail to Squaw Rock. We are the only car in this isolated parking lot. The total silence of the winter forest is only broken by the sound of our boots crunching the snow. So here we are, Jerry and I, smoking, laughing, and walking to Squaw Rock in the middle of the night. It's the dead of winter in Ohio, and thanks to the full moon reflecting on the fresh snow, our visibility is decent. I could easily see about 30 feet around me in all directions, but total darkness further than that. We're walking on a narrow trail that follows the river. On our left is a deep ravine facing the river. On our right is a very steep incline back up to ground level. While walking side by side, Jerry stops dead in his tracks and whispers, "Shh, dude, I heard something." I stop too and tell him it was probably a deer. I start walking again for just a moment and, swoosh. Crack. Jerry and I both scream like little girls as a dark figure flies down from the steep incline on our right and lands on the trail 10 feet in front of us. I adjust my eyes and start to see a woman. In the pale moonlight, she looks like a ducking witch. She has dark eyes, long white/grayish hair, and looks to be in her 50s. She is also dressed in a black snowsuit. I look down at her feet and notice, she's ducking skiing. That's right, she's skiing by herself, in the middle of the forest, miles from civilization, after midnight, on a Tuesday, in January. Apparently she was coming down the steep hill to the right of us, scattered with trees, mind you, saw us at the last second, panicked, and fell onto the trail. At this point, my stoned and paranoid brain is trying to process what I'm seeing. I'm truly creeped out. The Blair Witch on skis then quickly gets up and stares at us. The expression on her face is a cross between perplexed and angry, but not the least startled. Jerry asks her if she's okay. "Yes, fine," she replies in a slightly aggressive voice. Saying nothing else to us, she begins to make her way down to the river. The same place we were planning to go to. Jerry and I look at each other for a brief moment. I knew we were thinking the exact same thing. A combination of did that just happen? And WTF? We decided to quickly nope out of there and leave the park. To this day I can't seem to wrap my head around my Blair ski witch encounter. We had an unsettling experience at a rural rest stop in Kentucky. The incident happened to me and my ex-girlfriend in the summer of 2020. We were driving home from college for summer vacation, from Alabama to Kentucky. Eventually, we are taking some state highway in very rural Kentucky, and we pull off at a rest stop to use the bathroom. When we park, we are the only car there apart from a white truck parked across the lot. As we get out, I see 2 men standing by the truck. Just as we arrive at the bathroom, one of the men starts walking towards where we are. We split up to use the bathrooms. I finish up in the men's room, with no one else walking in, and decide to stand in front of the women's room to wait for my girlfriend. Both men are back standing by the truck now, but I have a bad feeling and want to make sure GF is okay. GF comes out of the bathroom, looking super uncomfortable. She is pale, and her eyes are super wide. She sees me and says, "Let me wash my hands," and goes back inside. Maybe a strange choice, it was just the beginning of the pandemic, so she was extra hygienic. I was confused but stayed by the door, feeling pretty unnerved. As I'm standing there, the men by the car start calling out to me, "Hey! Come over here." I remain still and tell my girlfriend to hurry up. She comes out, and we speed walk back to the car. When the doors are locked, she explains that when she was in the bathroom, she heard the door open and someone walk in. She was terrified and didn't have her phone, but she stayed silent, and eventually the person left. That's why she looked so scared when she came out and saw me. As we are driving out of the rest stop, we pass the truck and the 2 men. One of them looks my GF straight in the eye, grins, and waves. It still gives me chills to think about it. We called the police, but we never found out what happened to them or what they wanted. This was the only time anything like that happened to me. I have no idea what their true intentions were. Please let me know if anyone has theories on what they were up to. I was on a solo trail run at dusk. I am a morning runner, so being out that time of day was highly unusual for me. I was alone. No one knew where I was. It was a trail I've run hundreds of times. Halfway to the turnaround point I came face to face with a bear. His eyes locked on mine, and he immediately charged at me. My first thought was I'll never see my kids again. I immediately started to blow the whistle on my hydration vest, and it started the bear. He was no longer running but still walking quickly. I walked backwards while blowing that whistle for over a quarter of a mile back to the trailhead. I could still see the bear but luckily got in my car and was safe. Scariest moments of my life. Prowler. I've experienced the same prowler on my property 7 times. I've called the police every time. I've seen him 3 times. He's tall, dressed in dark clothing, and wears a ski mask. His MO is to make his presence known by throwing rocks on the roof and looking in windows wearing a ski mask. Most incidents have occurred on the weekend between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., with the exception of a Thursday around 6 p.m. The first time I saw him was in my sliding glass door in the back of the house. He unscrewed an outdoor floodlight and did not run away when spotted or yelled at through the windows. On one occasion, he returned after I called the police and they had left the property. I called the police again, and they were able to track his footsteps around my home, including walking on an adobe wall. The police believe it is a neighbor that retreats to a hiding spot, probably around the open space and informal trail behind my house, or runs back to his home to hide and return later. The first incident occurred in December, however, I think he has been stalking my home since the end of November. The most recent incident was several weeks ago. Prowler returned. I heard thuds on the roof around 12 a.m. and called 911. This morning I found rocks on the roof, around 20. This is the 8th incident I'm aware of. I dismissed loud thuds on the roof and unusual sounds coming from around the house early on. I've implemented security measures, including installing a surveillance system and acquiring firearms. The security cameras do not seem to scare him off. He has avoided them or allowed himself to be partially seen hiding behind bushes and trees. I'm concerned his behavior will escalate. I hope it doesn't come to a confrontation. But it's possible. Camping trip. My girlfriend at the time and I are on a backpacking trip through northern Vermont. We spent 10 days hiking and camping in the vast outdoors. We were carrying everything we needed for the entire trip, food, supplies, etc., and weren't planning on leaving the trail at all. I've been doing outdoor stuff my entire life and feel very comfortable on trips like this. My girlfriend had done a decent amount of hiking and camping but had never been on a trip this long. Honestly, I was totally psyched to have a girlfriend interested in this sort of thing. My previous girlfriends had been good for a day hike, but that's about it. Anyway, the woods and, more importantly, weather were beautiful, and everything on our trip was going great. Our routine was pretty simple. We'd hike around 15 miles during the day, and then when it started to get a bit dark, we'd hike off of the trail into the woods a few hundred yards or so and find a nice flat place to set up our tent for the night. It's always surprising to me how alone you can be out in the woods. The first few days we saw maybe 3 to 4 other hikers each day, usually just walking by us in the opposite direction. By the 4th day we had stopped seeing other hikers at all. This is because we had hiked farther north by this point into a more secluded area that experiences a lot less foot traffic. So it's the 7th night, and we haven't seen anyone else for probably 3 or 4 days at this point. I fall asleep and wake up very early, as I always do while camping. Typically I had been just lying in my sleeping bag waiting for my girlfriend to wake up, but while I was lying there I heard a noise outside of our tent of something walking around. We were pretty close to the edge of a river/lake, and I was excited, thinking that I might get to see a moose. I got out of the tent as quietly as I could. It was still dark out, the sun was not up yet, but my eyes were used to the low light. I scanned around for a moose or other animal but didn't see anything. Eventually I made something out though because of movement. There was a man standing about 100 feet from where our tent was, and as I watched, he turned off and walked into the woods. You know that feeling you get on a roller coaster when everything drops out from under you? I had that exact same feeling out in the woods and had no idea what to do. A lot of possibilities were racing through my head. Was he a hunter or a random camper who just stumbled on our tent? If so, why was he out so early in the morning? The sun isn't even up yet. I checked my watch, 4 a.m. If he wasn't a hunter, then were we unintentionally on his property? Was he pissed? Why didn't he say anything? I was having trouble coming up with explanations that made sense and weren't just completely terrifying. What is this person's deal? I ended up getting my girlfriend up a lot earlier than normal, and we hiked lots of extra miles that day. I had no idea if this guy was following us or what. I spent all day looking over my shoulder, expecting 100% to see him every single time coming up from behind. Of course nothing happened, and we finished out the trip safely. The vision of this person walking off into the shadowy woods is still completely etched into my mind years later. The man in the window. My dad grew up in rural Idaho in the 70s/80s. The ranch covers approximately 1,000 acres and is surrounded by Bureau of Land Management, BLM, land, which means there are no neighbors. One night, my grandparents left my father and his foster brother home alone while they attended an event in a larger city. Usually this was fine, the house is a mile from the road, so visitors were always expected and known in advance. It wasn't the sort of place strangers happen upon. My dad was walking down the hall and happened to pass the back door, which has a large window directly next to it. He was horrified to see a man's face pressed against it and staring at him. He didn't recognize the man, and he and the man stared at each other for a moment before the man moved away. My dad screamed for his brother, and both boys ran upstairs to the front door. The front door is a large, sliding glass door that overlooks the driveway. In the driveway was an unfamiliar car parked with the headlights on. Feeling trapped, they decided to call the closest neighbor they could think of. The neighbor agreed to come check the place out. They sat and watched the car parked, and though they said they never saw anyone get in or out, they watched the car pull away slowly and begin to drive off. Now, there are two bumpy dirt lanes that lead in and out of the ranch, one running north and the other running south, and both at least 1 mile long. The neighbor they had called arrived from the south only a few minutes after the car had pulled away, and my grandparents arrived from the north around the same time. Neither had passed the car nor had seen a man walking around. In the years since, almost all of my family has seen the car driving around the ranch, and few people have even seen the man with his face pressed to the window. We have no idea who he is, though. Mystery Man on the Hill. In the mid-80s, my mama worked at my school, in a different class than me. I was in nursery. To get to the school, she always took a shortcut over the heath. About 2 weeks earlier, a local girl in her late teens, who my family vaguely knew, went missing, and the last time someone saw her, she was over the heath. Mama said she wasn't that concerned by this, as she practically grew up over there. It was summer in the middle of the day, and the route she took was quite busy with other people walking their dogs and golfing. One day soon after the disappearance, Mama set off to work. Halfway to school she stopped. She told me many years later, she had that creeping feeling that you get when you are being watched. She looked over her shoulder, and at the top of the small hill she just walked down was a figure of a big tall man in biker leathers and a helmet. She said she couldn't see his face, but she had the uneasy feeling that he had been watching her for some time. She said it was funny because she had not seen him coming down the hill, but there was a heavily wooded area opposite to the hill, and Mama said she thought he might have walked through there. That would explain why she had not seen him before this time. Mama said she felt uneasy by his stillness and interest, so she walked a little faster, and soon there was a healthy distance between her and the stranger. On the way home later that day, she decided to get the bus home instead of walking. A week later, the body of the teenage girl was discovered by a dog walker in the same wooded area opposite the hill where the strange biker man had been watching Mama. There was a police search, and they appealed for information and witnesses. Mama contacted the police and made a statement about the mystery man on the hill. The police never did solve the murder of the poor local girl, and Mama never walked that way to work again. Lakeside lunatic. This incident happened to me and a close friend, both 23-year-old males, just last month. We decided to go on a 2-night backpacking/camping trip in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. We are both very comfortable with nature and spend a lot of time camping, hunting, fishing, etc. We hiked about 5 miles to a small lake and set up camp on a small beach. This was not a heavily trafficked area, and we did not expect to run into anyone. Our first night there, as we were sitting around the fire, we saw a flashlight moving on the other side of the lake around 10:30. This was fairly unusual, however, we did not think too much of it. But, as time went on, this flashlight kept moving around the lake, getting closer to our campsite. We kept discussing who could possibly be wandering around the woods in the middle of the night, and we did not particularly want an unwelcome guest. Once it was clear that the person, or people, was heading for our campsite, we moved off into the woods nearby to see who wandered up. I took a small axe with me, and he had a .22 rifle. Now we weren't expecting trouble, and we certainly didn't want to make any, but we figured we might as well cover our bases. Now, the moment of truth, the flashlight comes near the light of our fire, and it is one man. He has a beard and is probably in his mid-40s. The scary part was he was carrying what turned out to be a pump-action shotgun. He walked around the campsite a few times and then proceeded to enter our tent. After rummaging around for a minute or so, he came out and started yelling, "I know you're out there, why don't you come and say hello?" My friend and I remained motionless under a hemlock tree about 50 yards away. That is when the man proceeded to fire his shotgun into the woods, not too far from where we were. He also swung his flashlight around several times. After what felt like hours, he grabbed my friend's backpack and a few articles of clothing we had drying off near the fire and threw them in to burn. My friend, who had trained the .22 at the man, asked me if he should shoot. I told him absolutely not, unless he spots us and starts to point the gun in our direction. Thankfully the man moved off from where he had come after a little while. We waited until his flashlight was on the other side of the lake, ran out, grabbed everything we could fit in my pack, and took off. It was now around 2 or 3 a.m. We ran out the trail with flashlights and made it back to my car as the sun was coming up. We immediately went to the police department and reported it, where we also spoke with some forest rangers. That was it. I haven't heard anything back from the police. It wasn't mysterious, however, it creeped the hell out of both of us. Looking for a fishing spot. Rather than giving my boyfriend a traditional Christmas gift, I booked us a weekend at a cabin on Airbnb. We are not particularly experienced in outdoor activities, so I dedicated considerable time to finding a location that offered an appropriate level of privacy. I wanted something secluded but not desolate due to our lack of experience. I settled on a place on the outskirts of a 500-acre farm. It was right on the river and had an outhouse and outdoor cooking amenities. The weekend finally comes, and we are so excited to escape for a couple of days. It's only an hour and a half from our house but proved a bit tricky to locate. The owner sent us the classic turn-in at the sign, left at the fork, right at the tree directions to follow once we made it to the approximate address he gave us. After ending up at another rental on the property and bumping into the housekeeper, we were finally on track to reach our cabin. We drove past pigs, cows, and the main farmhouse. It was beautiful and serene until we got to the final stretch of road. I use quotes because it was more of a hiking trail barely big enough for our truck. It was bumpy and winding and treacherous as hell. After hyperventilating for 10 minutes or so in the passenger seat, we finally reached the bottom of the mountain, cross a stream, and pull up to the cabin. The first day and night go as planned. We met one of the farm hands our first day and the owner of the farm the second. Both were extremely friendly and helpful. Around 7 p.m. the second day, a truck pulls up and parks beside ours. We figured it was one of the people we had met or maybe someone else from the farm stopping by to say hi. We were wrong. 3 guys hop out of the truck and wave to us as if they are meant to be there. We are sitting on the front porch of the cabin, and my dog starts going nuts. He's a 90 pounds German Shepherd, so not only is it intimidating, it's loud as hell. I take him to the other side of the cabin and send my boyfriend to see who these people are. One of the guys asks him, "How's the fishing here?" My boyfriend replies that we haven't been here long and says he should ask the owner who lives on the property. The guy says something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, I know, we live around here. Just looking for a fishing spot." That's strange, but what can we do about it? I text the owner to let him know what's going on. No response. The guys fan out and start taking pictures of the property that I know I was in. They started taking videos of the property and themselves and are speaking another language. Naturally I start sketching out and text the guy again. No response. They leave after a few minutes, and I text the owner, letting him know they are on their way back up along with the make and model of their truck. No response. We agreed that none of us would be sleeping that night, so we packed our shit and left. 2 days have passed, and we still haven't received any response from the owner. I only interacted with him a couple of times, but when I did, he was so personable, and it just seemed so out of character for him to not say anything at all. It could have been nothing, but it was obvious those guys had been there before and were not looking for a fishing spot. Again, this was not some public place, nor was it easily accessible by any means. They knew which way to go to end up at the river and were completely comfortable driving miles through clearly marked private property, passing the main farmhouse and driving down a mountain. For what, I do not know, but I'm glad we never found out. Chased through the woods by a man. The incident occurred around 1999 2000s. My best friend and I were avid outdoor adventurers and amateur pot growers. We would frequently find secluded places in the woods that allowed for ample light and shade for plants to grow, but that would not allow them to be easily found. One particular day we went to an annex of trails located near the NJ State Park trail system. The trails weren't in the park, but I had hiked them before and knew they weren't that frequented. We had gone out that day with our seeds partially sprouted in moist paper towels. We parked the car at the trailhead and started hiking in. We covered a mile or so and then ventured off the trail and into the woods. We found a clearing, planted the seeds, and tied a few barely visible ribbons to mark the path back to the planting spot for future visits. My friend and I got back on the trail and started walking back to the car when my friend noticed a man in the other direction just staring at us. He was probably in his 30s or 40s, bald-headed. Normal clothes. We didn't think anything of it for the most part, but we definitely kept looking back as anyone would when someone is behind them in the woods. We saw that he was walking 60 plus or so feet behind us. It seemed weird, but it was probably more so due to us having anxiety that we planted seeds. We picked up the pace, but the man also seemed to pick up the pace, as we weren't gaining any distance. At one point we decided to just get off the trail and let him pass. We turned off the trail and walked into a thicket of sticker bushes, on which I remember vividly getting shredded. We got deeper into the woods and heard cursing. When we turned around, the man was coming through where we entered. It was at that moment we actually became scared. Mind you, you were two young, strong 19-year-olds, but a man following you into the woods is damn creepy. We made kind of a U-maneuver to outflank him and came out of the woods a bit further down the trail. Once on the trail, we ran. While we were running, we encountered a fork in the trail. My friend took the right path while I took the left. Realizing my mistake, I saw that my buddy was going down the correct path while I wasn't, so I turned around and started running back towards the fork to follow him. As I was running towards the direction we came from to get to the fork, I could see the man running towards me down the trail. He was a distance away, but not far enough for my comfort. Survival mode kicked in, and I ran as hard as I could. I caught up to my friend, who was waking at that point. I screamed, "He's after us!" And we both ran as fast as we could to the car. We got in the car shaking and out of breath. We backed up and started to get out of the parking lot when the man appeared at the trailhead. He stopped there and just stared at us as we drove away. I always wonder what that was all about. Did he want to kill a couple of 19-year-olds? Was he also doing something illegal in those woods and wanted us gone? My buddy and I still laugh and talk about that day 22 years ago. A creeper in the woods. I'm a 21-year-old guy. This happened to me back when I was in high school, about 5 years ago. It was my senior year, classes were winding down, and teachers were finding less to talk about as we were so excited to get out of there. This one teacher I had was super quirky, kind of weird but cool to me, as he always had intriguing experiences to share. He and my group of friends in the class became acquainted, unlike the other students who wouldn't listen to him when he attempted to speak about his past shenanigans. One day he brought up this oasis, as he called it, a place in the woods he would visit when he was young. It was a clearing deep within the trees, complete with dunes and a small beach, not too far from where we were going to school. We, of course, didn't believe him, so he showed us on Google Maps. Our naive selves thought that after school we could attempt to reach this place, entering from a backyard closest to the clearing. We should have known that 40-something years later, the layout of the place would have changed. Come the end of the day, I gather 3 of my closest friends. We all agree with the plan of using Google Maps as our GPS. After convincing one of our moms to drop us off with the lie of hanging at a friend's place, we made our way to the edge of the forest. God, I wish we had called it quits then. We started out all right, I guess, making our way closer by climbing through hordes of bushes and weeds. It was probably the most run down, gross, and dumped on part of the forest, with broken car parts and trash everywhere. Eventually, as we get closer to the supposed clearing, we hear a dog viciously barking in the distance. My alarms went off. What was a dog doing in the middle of the damn woods? It was fairly residential, so no hunting, but also no trails or any reason to be out there. My friends were a mix of angry at me for suggesting this and extremely anxious about how we were going to get through it. At this point, we just wanted to make it to the sandy beach part of the woods, which seemed so close judging by our distance on the maps. The closer we got, the louder the barking became. At this point we weren't saying much to each other as I led. We were literally up Schitt's Creek with nowhere to go. The barking seemed like it was coming from everywhere. I could see a dirt clearing ahead, so I just told everybody to make a break for it. At least in the open we could see what was coming at us. This was not the clearing we were hoping for, and one I could not find on the map when I tried to look for it later. Off in the distance was a medium-sized makeshift building. It appeared to be made of plywood painted gray and black. Above the door hung a giant animal skull with horns. I felt a pit in my stomach because I immediately knew this was the source of the barking, being as it was at its loudest. After managing to snap a pic, I stood there frozen, unsure what to do next. I came back to my senses when I heard a deep and angry voice shout, "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" from somewhere close by the building. I'd officially had enough of this situation. I'd gotten all my friends in this mess, so I felt responsible for their safety. I told everybody we're just going to have to bite the bullet and run blind through the woods. It could have been my mind playing tricks, but I swear it felt like the dog was chasing us, almost like somebody let it loose. After kicking through such dense wilderness and trees, we were so scraped up and bloody by the time we got far enough away that we felt safe. Huddled together and practically crying, I called my mother and told her the mess we were in. I gave her the street closest to the side of the woods we were on, and she gladly came and picked us up. She said when she saw us on the side of the road, it looked like we had been through hell and back. After that day, we barely spoke about it. We didn't even tell the teacher who started the whole thing in fear of somehow getting him in trouble. Creeper with the skull hut, let's not freaking meet. One dark and stormy night. Actually, it was the middle of summer, it was about 10:30 at night, the kids were in bed, and I was standing outside my front door chatting to my husband, who was working on his car, quiet wiring work, not noisy engine work. I walked inside and heard knocking on the back door, which was weird, as there's no way to get to our back door unless you hop the neighbor's hedge, as our passage has a locked gate. Just as I opened the back door, stupid, I know, I heard a commotion outside the front. At my back door is a big man with a massive knife in his hand. He begs, "Let me in, hide me please, they've got a gun." At this point I should add that I live in England and not in a city, so I'd be very surprised if they did have a gun, but anyway. I, of course, don't let him in, although if he'd insisted, I might not have had much choice. Luckily we have an outdoor cellar, and my husband has left the door open. I direct him to hide himself there, and he says, "Thank you," as he runs toward the cellar door. I quickly shut and lock our back door and go out the front to tell hubby. The commotion outside the front turns out to be 4 men in a car looking for this bloke. Hubby didn't see any gun or other weapon, and they went off down the street. Hubby came in, and we called the police. However, when we went to look in the cellar, he'd gone, leaving his knife on the workbench. Alaskan misadventure. Therefore, this is a story from a few years back. At that time, I was in high school, and my mother had just died unexpectedly in a car accident. To distract ourselves from the grief, my father, a few of his friends, and I took a trip down to the Copper River in interior Alaska. We lived in Fairbanks, Alaska, at the time. We drove down expecting to go dip netting. Go ahead and look it up if you're unsure of what that entails. Once we reached the Copper River, we took a detour to go on the less traveled side of the river. This is where we would set up camp. We drove our 4-wheelers down the winding dirt path that was right next to the river. Oftentimes there would be a steep drop that would only be cushioned by the silty river. After settling far down the path, we all set up our tents and got ready to go dip netting. Now bear with me, it's just some context. After a long day of dip netting, we called it a night and rode our 4-wheelers back to our spot. There were no other occupied camping spots that we had seen, all of them simply being small clearings that barely cut into the dense woods that surrounded the river. You could maybe see 20 feet into the trees before it was simply darkness. We reach our camp and begin to settle down, discussing our bad luck with fishing. We had just begun to cook hot dogs when we heard a gunshot down the path we had just come from. As I had said, we had seen no tents between where we had been fishing and where we were camping. Our campsite faced the river with the trail in between, and to the left was the path to getting back to civilization. To the right was simply wilderness. The gunshot was from the right. All 4 of us sit up, and Brian, one of my father's friends, suggests we check this out. We don't take our 4-wheelers, we simply hike down the trail. This is because it's very noisy, and startling. Whoever shot that gun wasn't something I'd say would be a bright idea. Brian and Robert both carry guns, and my father and I follow behind. This may sound alarming, but trust me, you definitely do not want to be asleep while people are shooting guns in the Alaskan wilderness or anywhere else for that matter. After traveling down the trail for what felt like hours and seeing no one, we reached the tunnel that you must pass through in order to reach the good spots for dip netting. We can make out multiple figures on the other end of the tunnel, and they are all moving. They seem to be dancing next to a fire, waving what we assumed were weapons in the air. We hunched down around the edge of the tunnel, peering in. Brian suggested they must be drinking, and this seemed like a logical assumption at the time. We talk about how we might approach them, telling them that it makes us uncomfortable and such for them to be shooting guns at this time of night. Although it may sound corny and unrealistic, the Alaskan darkness that hides all visitors at night feels inherently unsafe. We eventually reach the conclusion that we'll just set up camp farther away from them and not take the risk. As we head back along the trail, which is windy, we see glimmers of light scattered to the left. Headlights. We all duck into the bush, hiding. 2 trucks full of these teens pass us by, they screaming like banshees. Waiting it out is what we did, and after a long time of just sitting there, sometimes talking quietly, barely audible over the sound of the small waterfall nearby, we decide to go back to our camp. When we get there, we see our tents torn down, our fire put out, our four-wheelers knocked over, and just overall disheveling of the entire campsite. We decide to hightail it the duck out of there immediately. There is only one trail out, and they definitely didn't come back down the way they came from. This means they could only be between us and the way out. This is obvious to us all, but duck it. There's no way we can stay here. It was completely out of the question. We bundled everything together as quickly as possible, packing the torn down tents and attaching the coolers to the back of the two four-wheelers, and we headed out. The dirt path is tiny, and the truck could surely have run us off the edge if it were to have come down during our escape. Miraculously, we make it out of there without ever seeing those teens again. Needless to say, we haven't gone back to Dipnet there, nor will we. The RV couple. About 7 years ago, my husband and I were living with his parents. His mother didn't work, so essentially we were there helping his dad pay bills that his mom and her friends, aka neighborhood tweakers, would rack up. His mother was friends with a couple, let's call them Debbie and Dave, who lived in an RV with their young son, and she agreed that for $100 they could park in front of our house and use electricity and water. They were kinda odd but nice for the most part. They'd never really been creepy, and I'd never been alone with either Debbie or Dave before this. Usually I would just exchange small pleasantries in passing on my way to or from work/school. Not a big deal. Anyways, summer rolls around, so I had a bit more free time during the day, which meant I was hanging around at home more often. We had a big patio in the back and a nice setup with a table, chairs, and an outdoor bar. I made a habit of heading out there in the mornings to drink my coffee and smoke a bowl. It was quiet, and I enjoyed not having to deal with everyone else. This morning seemed off, though. When I got up to get coffee, around 8 a.m., the front door was wide open. Weird, but we had a lot of people in and out, so I figured someone came/left and forgot to shut it. So I shut it on my way to get my coffee and go out back. I finish my coffee and smoke and head back inside to get a second cup of coffee, and the door again is open. I start to shut it again when I hear someone yelling at me, "Hey, hold on. I need it open." I look out the door, and here comes Dave with this huge basket of clothes. "Can you show me how to use your washer?" "Yeah. No problem." So I take Dave to the laundry room and show him how to use our washer and dryer. Then try to leave to get my second cup of coffee. I'm halfway out the door when Dave grabs my arm pretty hard and says, "Wait, where are you going? I need to talk to you." He then goes on to explain he was going to dump Debbie and their son and leave them at her mom's house, and then came the big creepy moment. "You could move into the RV with me if you wanted." I tried to as nicely as I could let him know I was married and had no interest in living in an RV. "Oh, married? Aren't you a little young for that?" I was 22 at the time. Now if that didn't already piss me off and creep me out, the next sentence out of his mouth sure did. "And I'm sorry, but you don't seem that serious about that guy because you flirt with me all the time." I didn't. I'd barely spoken to this man, let alone flirted with him. Feeling somewhat nervous and a bit angry at this mid-40s balding, beer-gutted, jobless, and dirty man, I confronted him aggressively. I let him know in a not-so-nice way that I loved my husband, had never flirted with him, thought it was good he was ditching his son with his mom and grandma because then he'd have a way better life, and lastly, to duck off because I wasn't going to live in an RV with anyone, especially not him. Debbie later asked me if I had been rude to her husband. I then let her know the whole story. At which point she also got pissed and kicked him out of the RV. I haven't seen Dave since he got kicked out of the RV, and as for Debbie and the son, when the end of the month rolled around, they drove off to Nevada. Creepy waterfall lurker. During the summer of the first COVID lockdown in 2020, my dad, older brother, 2-year-old daughter, and I decided to take a trip to a local state park in Oklahoma that has a natural spring and waterfalls. Since outdoor places were some of the only respite during the first lockdown, a ton of people ended up being there. I, 34, female, got my daughter ready to go into the water. My dad had wandered off to talk to some friends he knew, and my brother left to purchase something to drink from the concession stand. I get my daughter all ready to go in her floaties and some sunscreen. We take off into the water and are looking at the big waterfall. Overall having a wonderful time outside and out of the house. Suddenly I get that horrible someone is watching me vibe. I look up to see a random dude in his 30s swimming close by with his friends. Just openly and unapologetically staring. My daughter then looks up at me and then looks over to the man staring at us. He then motions with his hands for her to swim to him. WTF, dude. Mama bear instincts kick in, and I give him a huge go to hell look and start frantically swimming to shore with her. As we get closer to shore, my brother is thankfully now on shore and set up on the beach. I start very loudly calling to him and talking to him. I look back several times, and the man is still staring. I finally make it over to my brother and tell him what happened. He angrily stares at the man until he finally looks away. We moved to a different area shortly after that, and I never saw the man again. The kicker to this story is after we got home, I was looking through all of the pictures I took throughout the day. I start to scroll through the pictures that my dad took of my daughter and me shortly before we went into the water. The man is in the background of every single picture, staring at us from the water. Very glad my dad and brother were there and that we made it home unharmed and safe. Alone in the woods. This incident happened to me over 30 years ago, but I remember the feeling of fear as if it were yesterday. I was in college, female, and taking a course in outdoor survival. The course ended with a 3-day, 3-night wilderness solo. We were allowed to take a backpack, empty canteen, sleeping bag, knife, 6 matches, rope, a sheet of plastic, a change of clothes, extra socks, halazone tablets, a small cooking pot, and a spoon. We were not allowed to bring food or water since part of our training was in identifying edibles and finding a water source. Once I was dropped off, I had to hike in to find a spot to set up camp. First, I had to place a flag on a tree near my drop-off point so that I could be located 3 days later for pickup. I was loving life. Just me and nature. I had no fears, even as night began to fall. I enjoyed the sounds of the woods all around me and didn't mind not having a tent. I built a small fire and had a great feeling of peace. I slept well that night but woke up thirsty. My search for a water source began. Happily, I found a muddy stream, let the water settle in my pot, placed the tablets in the water, and boiled it for good measure. Yuck, what a crappy taste, but at least I was hydrated. All went well, and I had a great time, until my last day. It was early afternoon on the last day, and it was time to break camp. I cleaned up my camp area and hiked out to my drop-off spot. As I sat, leaning against a tree, I heard the sound of a vehicle off in the distance. I figured that it had to be my pickup. As I waited, a vehicle that I had never seen before pulled up on the dirt path in front of me. Immediately, I realized that I did not know the man who was driving. He gave me an odd look. My gut told me that he was bad news. He asked what I was doing there and if I was alone. I said that my friends were behind me breaking camp. He gave me a knowing look, got back in his vehicle, and rode off. I was terrified. I knew that I had to hide. And fast. I ran into the woods and hid. As I ran, I heard the car come back. I stayed as quiet as I could and remained hidden. I heard him get out of the car. I could hear him calling to me and walking through the brush looking for me. I was so afraid. Eventually, he gave up, and I heard the car door slam, the engine start, and the car pull away. Going back to my drop-off point was not an option, so I began hiking through the woods, hoping I would find base camp. After walking for what felt like hours, I saw a forest ranger. I told him who I was and what had happened to me. He told me that I had done the right thing since a young woman had been lost and possibly hurt the night before and the police and Forest Service had been searching the area. Happily, he drove me to the base camp, where I learned that another girl in my class had had a creepy encounter with a man the night before. She had scared him away by blowing a brass whistle until help arrived. If there is anything to be learned from this, it is to be sure to always trust your gut feelings and never camp alone. Chased out of Capitol State Forest in Olympia, Washington. This happened years ago but pops into my head a lot. I'm hoping maybe throwing it out into the ether will help me get over it. So in March to April 2019, I just moved to Washington in October and made a friend who was stationed at JBLM, also not native to the state. He and I were constructing a camping area in the back of his pickup, and at midnight, we spontaneously decided it would be enjoyable to spend a night in the national park. We make the drive out there, and I note it's kind of weird that the road is lined with residential homes, and at some point the road turns to dirt, and I guess we're in the park. This was a month or two after Snowmageddon, and the parks were out of season, so the road out was pretty rough, but we made it through. Not being from here, I had an eerie feeling off the bat from I think they're Douglas trees, that were bald except for the very tops from the heavy snow. Dunno what it is, they just feel unnatural and foreboding to me, even all these years later. Initially we pulled off onto a little hill facing some tall grass that had a board for arrow practice. We hang out here for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but, probably just creeped out from the trees honestly. I tell him I don't want to stay in that spot because there's only a narrow path to drive in and out of, and I didn't love the idea of getting blocked in there. He says, alright, and we pull out and head down the road a few minutes further and find a proper parking area at a camping trailhead. We were using a portable battery we'd gotten for the first time, and it made this wild sound when he turned it on, so he was outside away from the truck messing with it, and I'm trying to relax in the back but just couldn't shake this weird feeling. there wasn't a way to go directly from the bed to the cabin, and this being the first time we weren't just on the side of the road, I was a little anxious, so I stood outside for a minute just looking around and listening. I think I was more trying to hear for bears since those were a new thing for me to have to worry about, but instead I heard tires. I told my buddy to stop and listen, and then I saw lights in the distance, and we both threw the back shut and hopped in to leave. As we're driving out, the lights are at the top of the hill, and I tell him to slow down off to the side, thinking it was probably some sort of park official out to make sure we're not causing trouble and tell us to skedaddle. He rolls the window down, and as they pass, I look, and the truck is not marked. There are 2 men in the front. They are not park officials. They make direct eye contact with us and do not slow down. The second I see their faces, I tell my friend absolutely the duck not and to gun it. The truck continued towards the parking lot, and I felt a bit of relief until I noticed they had turned around and were now catching up to us. We're probably going about 45-50 down some pretty rugged road, and they are directly behind us within a couple of minutes. Once we make it back to the residential street, which might have only been 1 or 2 turns from where we were, but thank God my friend was able to remember the way back, we hit 60 to 70. They have not backed up at all and now have their brights on. I remember while looking out the window at the mirror noticing a house's porch light flick on. I spun around to look out the back, and someone was beginning to step out. Finally thought to glance over at the time, and it was around 3 a.m. The people at the house were probably unrelated, still weird, but realizing the time exaggerated how insane it is that people were chasing us. Anyways, we get to the stop sign and obviously do not even slightly slow down as we pull onto the main road. At that point the truck then overtakes and passes us, must have been going 100, and turns right down a side road. I'm now pissed. Tell my buddy that there's no way in hell. Let's go get them. Turn down the same road, maybe 15 to 20 seconds later, and they are gone. There was a dead-end neighborhood street to the left that they couldn't have been in, a gas station a minute or 2 up the road that they weren't at, and then the interstate. How they made it all that way in such a short amount of time is beyond me, but the only explanation is saved for going down the first side street, parking in a driveway, and shutting off their car immediately. Could have been behind the gas station, but in either scenario, why were they now the ones hiding? After the fact, I look up the park, because what the hell was even that? Find out we did not go to Olympic National Park and were instead in Capitol State Forest, where the only weird thing I could really discover was a body being found in a burned out truck back in 2012. There is only a single article about that, so I have absolutely no idea if they ever figured that one out. Everything else was various accounts of people being shot or being found shot, but with there being gun activity allowed in a park, WTF? I don't find that particularly surprising. More than likely it was probably some people living on that street that noticed us going out there in the middle of the night and figured we were up to something and would freak us out. I hope so at least. I can't really imagine what would have happened if they had gotten to the parking lot while we were unprepared, or worse, if we were still in the original spot on the hill. Saw something unsettling from my balcony. So I'm not exactly sure where to share this, but I feel like this might be the best spot for it. I recently moved out into an apartment building, all the way up on the top floor. My balcony is at the back of the building. The view is mostly trees, but there are some houses and a street directly behind the apartment building, so I can see that too. I usually sit out on my balcony at night, getting high and listening to music. At night, the view is just darkness aside from the house porch lights and the road lit up by streetlights. Most of the road view is covered by trees, but I can see a good amount of it. There's also no light from my balcony, so at night I just sit in the dark, aside from the light coming from my phone. So anyway, I was sitting out there at around 10 p.m. or so, like I usually do, and I noticed movement from the road. When I looked down, I saw someone running down the road, like, really fast. From my distance, it looked like this person was running faster than any human should. I was simply observing when the person suddenly stopped beneath a street lamp. Under the light, I could tell this person was a man. I also realized this person was now looking up at me. I got nervous, but I didn't move because I thought I could just be overthinking, and maybe this guy wasn't actually looking at me. How could he? My phone wasn't on, so I was sitting in complete darkness. Could he really see me from all the way down there? I just kept sitting there, hoping the guy would leave, but then I saw him waving at me. Now I knew he was looking at me. I was too uncomfortable to do anything. I couldn't even go back inside. I just sat there, getting increasingly nervous. My thoughts started running wild. I was worried that this guy might find my apartment and attempt to break in. I also thought he would somehow just sprint forward and climb up the building to get to me or something. But as I kept staring at this person waving at me, a sudden feeling of dread came over me. At that moment, I began to gather my belongings to return inside, but then I noticed that he had stopped waving. He reached both his arms out to the side and started swaying his body side to side, bending his knees as he moved and wiggling his arms around like a weird dance move. At this point, I felt incredibly unsettled and just wanted to go back inside. However, I was also slightly intrigued and curious about what he might do next. Soon, feelings of dread and unease overwhelmed me, prompting me to finish packing my belongings before going inside. In the room next to the balcony, there was a window that overlooked the same area, so I peeked outside while trying to stay hidden behind the wall. I saw this person still moving around, side to side, but he soon stopped, and I saw him just start booking it down the road again. I made sure my front door was locked, and I went back to my room, locking the bedroom door as well. My bedroom window looks out in the same direction, so I made sure that person was gone and closed my curtains. I didn't really sleep that night. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had. The incident happened a couple nights ago, and I haven't seen this guy since then. I've still been sitting out on the balcony, but I've been getting really paranoid when I'm out there at night, so I don't stay out for as long as I did. I don't really know what to make of this whole thing. I don't know who that person was, or maybe what he was. I get really uncomfortable and paranoid when I recall that night, like I'm back in that moment, feeling those exact feelings again. Also, since then, I experience occasional waves of dread, like at times throughout the day, I get the feeling that I'm being watched. I hope this feeling goes away soon, and I'm really hoping I don't see that person ever again. The man behind the tree. On a Saturday night in July of this year, I arrived home around 1 a.m. after spending the evening watching UFC pay-per-view at a sports bar with my friends. I was in a genial mood since it was an astonishing night of fights and because one of my favorite UFC fighters, Conor McGregor, had won his fight. As I made my way up the steps that lead to the side door of my house, I kept replaying his victory in my head. Being the safe, sheltered person that I am, when I arrive home late at night, I always have my house key ready to be put into my door as I approach it, but because I was so focused on thinking about the fight, I was not as aware and mindful of my surroundings as I usually am. As I got to the top of the steps, I heard what sounded like rustling coming from my backyard, which is about 30 feet away from my side door. I leaned over the banister and began scanning my backyard, hoping the noise I heard was just the raccoons that live in one of the humongous trees in the yard. My heart started to beat faster, and I began experiencing that sinking feeling in my chest. As I am surveying my backyard, I notice an unusual mass next to one of my trees. As I looked closer, I made out what looked like a person's head, which I was only able to see because it was slightly illuminated by my neighbor's outdoor light, peering out from the side of the tree. I looked even closer, and as I did, the person moved his or her head back behind the tree. My eyes widened, and I could feel adrenaline starting to pump through my veins. At that point, I was terrified, but I decided that I was not going to run inside my house. Instead, I crouched down, carefully made my way down the steps, and headed towards the backyard. As I focused on being quiet and felt my heart pounding, I crept up to the tree behind which the person was hiding. When I was about 10 feet away from it, I saw the person, who I now could see was a skinny white guy, poke his head and shoulders out from behind the tree. I shrieked, froze in fear, and, with a shaky voice, muttered, "What the duck are you doing?" We stared at each other for a brief moment, and then he quickly turned, began to run towards my back fence, jumped over it, and faded into the darkness. Freaked out and shaking, I ran back to the side door, unlocked it, hurried inside, and dialed 911. I told the operator what had occurred, what the man looked like, and what direction he had headed in. My parents are now awake and horrified at what happened. The police arrived at my house and took a report. Unfortunately, they never managed to find the person. What bothers me is that I will never know why he was in my backyard or what he was intending to do. Since that summer night, when coming home late, I always hastily make my way to my door. I still look at that tree, thinking that I am going to see his head peer out. I will never forget his face and the way that he stared at me. Creepy experience: dispersed camping in the boonies. I live in the desert and do a lot of dispersed camping on BLM land in very remote areas. I've been doing it for years and have probably 200 nights under my belt, easily 3x that if you count backpacking. Needless to say, I have a lot of very remote campsites pinned on Google Maps. Enough to not need to stay at the same site more than once or twice per year. I usually go remote enough to not feel safe without enough supplies to spend the week if I need to, car trouble, severe weather, flash floods, etc. I also practice wilderness survival. Cell reception, and regular emergency services, just doesn't happen out there. Dispersed solo camping out of my Jeep is usually a pretty safe, uneventful, but awesome experience, save for a few dangerous and strange encounters that I've had. I rarely encounter aggressive animals but have enough times to carry protection, and I have a routine of securing the perimeter around my campsite with my dog, unarmed if you're curious. I'm not trying to scare any potential neighbors I might have missed when I pulled in. Primarily, we check for nearby campers, signs of wildlife, water sources, and hazards such as cliffs or barbed wire that could be difficult to see at night. I'm also on alert due to a few bizarre murders that have happened out in the middle of nowhere not that far away. About a year ago I was camping at one of my favorite spots. I go there a few times a year, but just for context, it's very, very remote. Easily an hour from the nearest gas station, 45 minutes from cell reception, 6 hours from the nearest city, if you want to call it that, and down at least 10 miles of rough dirt roads. The BLM appears to have overlooked these dirt roads, necessitating a modified 4WD for safe navigation. I do my rounds with my dog, and oddly enough, I see a large SUV about 60 yards away behind some desert cedars. After about 30 minutes a middle-aged guy walks over to my Jeep and starts talking to me. He said that there had been some sketchy people in the area and it didn't seem safe. He seemed to think I should leave. I started asking for details, since I like to be aware of my surroundings and to be prepared. He didn't have much detail to offer but started asking questions like if I was alone, if anyone else was coming, if I could protect myself, and if I was armed. I let him know that yes, I can, and I'm indeed armed. He even asked what firearm I had and what ammo was in it. I let him know I had $0, followed up by hard cast magnum slugs. Those things will go through an engine block and keep going if you aren't familiar with them. I lied and said I had friends coming in a little while, but their ETA was TBD. Well, he looked pensive for a minute, then a little upset, then walked to his vehicle and sat for a few minutes before driving away. Being as confused as I was and as familiar with the area as I am, I just explored a larger perimeter, didn't find anything, and stayed for the night. Nothing bad happened. I've been wondering about this and saw a post on here a few months ago about a similar situation where the people left and came back to find the Good Samaritan who warned them to be fishing by the river. Apparently he just wanted the campsite to himself. Do you think the guy was just trying to get me to leave, or do you think he was legitimately warning me? My only other thought was a possible meth cookout nearby, but now I'm leaning towards the guy just being a jerk and wanting the place to himself. In which case, did I scare him off? When I was 18, I spent a lot of time in the Kahata wilderness. My favorite spot was a set of waterfalls several miles from the nearest parking area. Most visitors parked in the RV area and swam in the creek next to the gravel road. During the 2 years I hiked those trails, I never saw anyone venture more than half a mile into the trail. Anyway, one Saturday I took my girlfriend to see the waterfalls since she had never seen one in person before. We set off on the trail, and not 15 minutes into the walk, she grabbed my arm and got quiet and said she felt like she was being watched and had the heebie-jeebies. I assured her everything was safe. The only thing I'd ever had to worry about in my part of the woods was the occasional bear or copperhead. We continued on, but she could never shake the feeling of being watched. I just figured she wasn't used to wilderness and was having trouble adjusting. A couple hours later we finally reached the end of the trail and had a picnic at the bottom of the falls. After we finished eating, she tried to check her cell phone for messages and started to panic when she realized we had no service. I explained to her that there was no cell reception anywhere around for miles and that we are finally alone and can enjoy the peace and solitude. Which, of course, made her panic. We started heading back almost immediately because she was clearly scared, and I couldn't help but smile, thinking it was silly. On the way back I explained to her how many times I'd been out there all alone and never had any problems, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We were about a mile from the falls on the only trail around when we heard someone call from behind. I jumped nearly out of my skin and turned to see a man walking toward us. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder and a heavy beard with his hat tipped low. She took a small step behind me. "What can I do for you?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. "You guys left your cell phone back by the falls," he said. I saw a slight grin behind his beard as he looked at my girlfriend. "Oh, thanks for the assist," I said, extending my hand. He shook his head and told me he didn't bring it, and that it was still sitting up there, and maybe we should follow him back up there and get it ourselves. We politely declined and made our way back down the trail as quickly as we could with him following us on the trail several feet behind. He followed us all the way back to our car, and she showed me her cell phone when I opened her door. I haven't been back to that particular trail since then. Hence Stalker. This happened just over 2 years ago, and it has seriously made me rethink camping alone. I was with 2 friends this time, and I worry about what would have happened if I was by myself. 2 friends and I were on a cross-country trip, and Roswell, New Mexico, was one of our stops. We were there for the kitsch, but we were also camping for most of the trip, so we got a site at Bottomless Lake State Park, about 20 minutes outside of the city. We did our thing in town for the day and headed back to our site around sundown. Everything seemed pretty standard at first. There were some neighbors camping down the road, and we could hear their music. The Moldy Peaches. A pretty lighthearted soundtrack, which didn't set the creepiest of tones. My two friends, who were a couple, read and wrote in their journals by lantern light, and I drank a couple of beers while taking long exposure photographs of our campsites. The music died down, my friends got tired and went to sleep, and after I got the shot I wanted, I did too. I awoke fairly disoriented, somewhere in that state of transition from light to deep sleep. I heard crunching around my tent. Not knowing if I was dreaming or not, I just kind of sat up in my tent to figure out if what I was hearing was real or just remnants of sleep. I started to hear it again, and this time it was closer. This sound wasn't just closer, it was directly outside of my tent. Understandably, the hair on the back of my neck was poker straight, and I knew something was up. There was a moment that I thought that it could have been a ranger. Who knows, maybe our registration was messed up, or maybe we left the headlights on for the car. I called out, "If someone is out there, can you please make your presence known?" Nothing. "Hello? Please, identify yourself." Nothing. I sat there, frozen with the most intense sense of fright I've ever felt, and it was dead silent. I calmed myself to lie back down, hoping I'd been imagining it, and closed my eyes. From what I could tell, within the next 5 minutes the footsteps started moving around my tent. I shot back up and ducking knew someone was out there. At this moment, something so surreal happened that I can't quite adequately express my sense of fright. As I sat there, open-mouthed and silent, the end of my tent started to be lifted up by the person outside. I screamed for my friends in their tent, screamed for them to wake up, and said that someone was outside. It felt really hectic, my friends were disoriented, I was disoriented, and from then on, I didn't hear or see anything else. My friend was basically yelling at me to stick my head out of my tent and check it out, but I was absolutely terrified that if I did I'd get my head lopped off or I'd have a gun stuck in my face. I finally worked up the balls and saw nothing. No one. We got out of the tents and into the car, and I told them everything. They seemed concerned yet skeptical. I was adamant that something had happened. We decided to shine our headlamps from the car in the direction of our tents, which were kind of surrounded by these rocky hills and a dried-up riverbed. As we scanned the rocks with our lights, another light hit the rocks right behind our tents. We decided that it would probably be a good idea to leave our shit and get a motel room, so we headed to Roswell at about midnight. The whole night I felt kind of stupid. I was also really scared. I kept trying to tell myself that I was just dreaming, or that it was a raccoon, or that I'd just seen too many horror movies. We kind of joked about it, watched Cops on the shitty motel TV, and fell asleep. When we went back in the morning, my fears were unfortunately confirmed. We rolled up, and nothing seemed to be out of place. Nothing stolen or moved, or so we thought. We start picking up our things, and I begin to take my tarp off. My friend says out loud, "Well, that is really ducking weird," and signals me over. The elastic/bungee cords that hold the rainfly on his tent were cut clean through, like with scissors or a knife. The tent was brand new. I went back over to my tent to see if I had the same and was immediately drawn to the fresh boot prints that circled my tent. Footprints that were on top of mine. That said, we packed up, and we did it fast. We almost didn't even really talk about it. I actually even think that my friend who got his tent cut open is still a bit skeptical. I can't say for certain who this person was, or what they were trying to do, but they certainly achieved scaring the living shit out of me. Creepy, scary old stalker. This happened to my cousin Jane a year ago. She was 13 at the moment. She and her friends Kate, 13, Josh, 15, and his brother Chris, 10, started to encounter an old man regularly, always before school and sometimes after school. First, he just stared, and they didn't mind. But after a week he started to follow them to school. They found it weird but didn't do anything. Then, he started to stalk Jane and Kate all over the town. They didn't notice. Sometimes Josh and Chris saw him. I don't know why, but even Josh was scared. And Josh broke a 17-year-old guy's nose earlier that year, while the guy's friends were around. This behavior continued for a month, and then one morning, he suddenly stepped in front of Jane and Kate and took their photograph. They immediately reported to their teacher. The principal called the police and their parents, and the police started to investigate. They didn't find the creep, but when the school ended, 2 policemen always waited to go with the escort to defend the group, if needed. Jane, Josh, and Chris live in a small village with about 30 inhabitants almost 4 miles away from the school, so they didn't need any protection there. However, Kate had to stay home all day. The creep seemed to disappear for a month, until he appeared again and photographed even more girls from Jane's class. The girls have reported this, and the police investigation started again. This time they caught him when he was stalking Kate. The police asked him several questions, and he provided answers to some of them. He is now not allowed to enter the town, or something like that, for a year. Now, it would be good if there wasn't a town with a similar size with more schools. The town where I live. I am now afraid he'll come and do something to one of my friends. I always bring a pocket knife with me, and girls never go alone. 14-year-old psycho. When I was 11, my family lived in Alaska, about 14 miles north of Anchorage. As soon as you leave the actual city of Anchorage, you're in the wilderness fairly quickly. This event happened to me in the summer of 1977. I remember because the original Star Wars had just come out a few weeks before, and I was obsessed with it at the time. In 1977, the town I lived in was actually just a series of roads and off-roads. Most of the people there commuted to Anchorage for work. That's what my parents did. They both worked nights, meaning I spent most of my time alone at home. I don't have any siblings. Our house was about a half-mile in from the nearest paved road and surrounded by woods. I didn't have any real friends who lived nearby. I knew a kid who lived at the end of my road. His was actually the next closest house and was still about 300 yards from mine. One afternoon that summer, I was watching TV when there was a knock at our side door. I looked outside and saw it was the kid from the end of the street with someone else. I opened the door, and the kid from the end of the street told me that the other boy was his cousin, whose family had flown in from their home to visit. I can't remember the kid's name. I do remember immediately being nervous around this guy. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders and wore a t-shirt under a thin leather vest. He also carried a wallet attached to a chain. This kid's eyes were dark as hell. I was 11 and hadn't ever seen evil before, but this kid set off something in my brain. The boy from down the street even seemed nervous around him. He said he had told his cousin about my BB gun and how cool it was. I had recently been given a BB gun as a gift. I told them to wait outside, and I would get it. I just knew I didn't want that kid in my house. I got the BB gun and went outside and handed it to the weird kid. He rolled it over in his hands and looked at it up and down without his expression ever changing. Without handing it back, he asked me, "How much do you want for it?" I can't remember my reaction after all of these years, but I didn't really need money, and the gun was a gift, so I told him it wasn't really for sale, and I remember apologizing for some reason. Unfazed, the kid hands the gun back to me, then reaches behind his back and pulls out the biggest damn knife I had ever seen. I remember thinking for a second that it was a sword. If you've ever seen the movie Crocodile Dundee, where he tells some robbers, "That's not a knife. This is a knife." And pulls out a huge knife. Well, that's the knife this kid had. The kid said, "How about a trade, then?" I shot the BB gun at cans. What was I going to do with this thing? Hunt a grizzly bear? I declined the offer nervously, and the kid turned away and started walking in the direction of their house. I went back inside and watched some more TV. About an hour later, there's another knock on the door. I go to our side window, where I can see the door. I peek out, and sure enough, it's that kid again. This time he was alone. The second time he knocked was louder. He called my name. I stayed quiet. He left the door and started walking around our house. My mother had a sunroom where she grew plants. It had large windows all along the wall. I saw him go to those windows, press his face against the glass, and cup his eyes, trying to see deep into the house. I stayed out of sight. Luckily there were no lights on, and I had turned the TV off when I heard the knock. When he couldn't see anything, he continued around the house. He took out that huge knife and began tapping the butt of the handle along the outer wall as he circled. Then he started saying, "I know you were in there." I almost shit myself. Of course, he knew I was in the house. I was 11, home alone. How could I have left the house? Hop in a car and take off? Hell, both our cars were gone anyway. I continued keeping low and quiet, hoping he might think I went to a friend's house somewhere else. How long could this psycho just circle the house? He was maybe 14. He'd get bored pretty quickly. No such luck. This kept up for about an hour. The tapping and his voice telling me to come out and that he had another trade for my gun. Screw that. I had gone all in on the "I'm not home" tactic, so I stayed quiet and made my way to the kitchen, where our one telephone was. This was 1977. At that time, there were no cell phones, and our only phone was attached to a wall in the kitchen. Luckily it had a super long handset cord. I got it, stayed low to the floor, and called my mother at work. She took me seriously, but there was no way she could get home. My dad was in the Air Force, and they sure wouldn't let him skip out early to handle his son's crisis. I would have to ride it out. The sun had gone down, and by that, I mean it was barely peeking above the horizon. In the summer, the sun never went completely down in our area. The kid kept pacing around for another 30 minutes or so and then was suddenly gone. Not being an idiot in a horror movie, I just stayed down and quiet. Eventually my parents got home. I was still awake. They brushed it off as if to say, "See, nothing to worry about." I never hung out with the kid down the street again, and I stayed inside the remainder of the summer. There was something wrong with that kid. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe he would have done something absolutely brutal to me, just for that damn BB gun. I was chased through the woods and into our apartment building. The following took place about a month ago, in late October, when I was traveling home from a student party. The party took place in the center of Helsinki. I live a short train ride away in a student apartment building in Ulunkaila. Since it was a weekday, there was a break in the trains sometime after midnight. Even the buses don't go straight to Ulunkaila at that hour. Therefore, I had to take a bus that goes to the airport but stops at the Kapaila train station. I departed from there and made my way home on foot. It's not a long walk, maybe 15 minutes. The path goes beside the train tracks, through a wooded area. After a while it branches into two paths, the other goes deeper into the woods and eventually cuts to a neighborhood. The other continues by the train tracks. I have frequently chosen this route when returning late at night, and I often take evening walks in that area. Therefore, I have never felt apprehensive while walking there, even after dark. Sometime after midnight my friends escort me to my bus. I put on my headphones and fall asleep. I wake up to the bus coming to a sudden halt. It's my stop. In a hurry I stumble out of the bus. After the scare of almost missing my stop, I'm not feeling as tired anymore. Listening to music, I start making my way towards home. As I turn off the main road, I see a figure walking behind me. I can see them just at the corner of my eye. I turn to look, and it's a guy, dressed casually and wearing a baseball cap. He must have been close to my age, somewhere in his 20s. Although it was hard to make out his features since his cap was shadowing his face, and I was still very drunk. He looks at me, and I try smiling at him. No response, he just turns his gaze to the ground. I turn away, and we continue walking in the same direction. I take my phone out and start sifting through Spotify. In my drunken haze I drop the phone to the ground. I'm kind of embarrassed since I know the guy must have noticed. He probably thinks I'm a drunken arse. I crouch to pick up the phone, and the guy walks past me. He picks up his pace, and I get left behind. I don't lose sight of him, though, and soon I see him arrive at the crossroad. He stops and takes out his phone. I think he might be lost or uncertain about his direction. As I walk past him, I look at him questioningly, maybe he needs help. But he gives me the iciest look, and I decide not to bother. I continue on the path that goes through the woods and into the nearby neighborhood. At that time a part of the path wasn't lit, something was wrong with the streetlights. I'm getting closer to that area, and from under the streetlights it looks like a dark void. Suddenly, I get a strange feeling. Through the music I hear something. Footsteps. I turn to look and see the guy walking not far behind me. The hairs on my neck stand. I don't know why, but I feel odd. I try telling myself that I'm just drunk and feeling a bit paranoid. Still, I notice that I've picked up my walking pace. I reach the end of the streetlights and take a few steps into the darkness. My eyes adjust, and then I start running. I just want to lose this guy, friendly or not. The path turns downward as I exit the woods. The last stretch goes right beside some houses, so I feel a bit safer. Furthermore, I think I've lost the person. I stop to catch my breath, but as I do so, I once again hear something. This time it's someone running. My heart drops. Without even looking back, I start running again. I run as fast as I can, and when I reach the end of the path, I cut through some bushes and sprint to our front door. I fumble with the keys, open the door, and slam it shut. I'm shaking and gasping for air in our corridor. I don't turn on the lights, I just start climbing the stairs to our third-floor apartment. I walk the first flight of stairs and stop to stare out the window at the street. As I stare at the empty street, I start to think that maybe I was just overreacting. However, all the doubt washes away instantly as I see the familiar figure turn to our street, clearly looking for something or rather someone. I instinctively take a step away from the window. I stand as still as I possibly can and pray that none of my neighbors want to go outside to smoke at this time of the night. I wait until I can't see him anymore and then proceed to climb the stairs to our apartment. Just as I reach the third floor, I hear the outdoor opening. I freeze. Whoever entered the building takes a couple of steps in and lets the door close. It's dead silent. Both I and the person downstairs are standing still. I'm afraid they can hear my heart beating out of my chest. Tears swell in my eyes, I'm petrified. I have the keys in my hand, but I'm afraid they'll hear me if I try to move. Duck it. I think as I reach for the door. I hear the person bolt up the stairs. Luckily there are 2 flights of stairs between us, and they aren't fast enough to reach me. I slam the door shut. Standing in our dark hallway, shivering, I'm waiting to hear someone start pounding on our door. But nothing happens. Our apartment door doesn't have a peephole, but even if it did, I'm not sure I would have had the courage to look through it. Neither of my roommates is home, and so I just stand there and quietly weep. After a while I walk to my room, and without turning a single light on, I go to sleep. Like I said, this was approximately 1 month ago. A couple of weeks after the incident I was super jumpy and on edge, especially at night. But as weeks passed and nothing else happened, I haven't run into anyone that might have been the guy. I've been able to move on, though I still sleep with a baseball bat next to me. I'm still not sure if I was in any real danger or if it was somebody playing a crude prank on me. I mean, I don't even know if it was the same person on the path and in our corridor. I hope not, because if it was, that would mean that he lives in the same apartment building as me or that he can pick locks. TBH, I don't know which is worse. I have shared this story with my friends on several occasions, and it has been quite beneficial for me. Now I think of it like it's just some freaky incident that happened to me, a spooky story to tell in the dark. I think that's my way of dealing with it. And that's why I wanted to share it here. The creepy guy at the cliffs. My story happened in 2010, probably around May. I live in NC, and the weather at that time of year is great for outdoor activities because during most of the summer months, the humidity can make this place feel like hell. So one weekday afternoon my, now ex-husband and I took our then almost 1-year-old son to a nearby state park that was fairly small with lots of trails through woods on cliffs overlooking a river. We would go there occasionally for hiking but knew well enough that our 1-year-old couldn't handle walking the trails, so we planned to split up. We would take turns jogging the shorter but harder trail alone while the other parent took our son through the small museum and surrounding area at the park. My husband went jogging first while I hung out with our son. There were no issues whatsoever. He comes back, and I leave them in the museum and start my jog. I run a few laps around the short circular trail before deciding to head back. As I'm starting towards the trail in the woods that leads to the museum, my husband calls my cell, which was odd because we didn't talk on the phone much, especially when I'm at most a few minutes walk from him. I answer, and he has a strange, worried tone and just says, "Are you okay?" I tell him I am but ask why. He just says, "Could you go ahead and start back this way, please? I'll explain when you get here." I tell him I'm already walking that way, and we hang up. I mentioned that this happened on a weekday because had it been a weekend, there would have been other people around, I'm sure. However, on this random weekday the park was totally empty except for my family. That's what I thought until this point anyway. I'm walking down the trail leading to the museum and I see a man walking towards me. That isn't odd, it's a nice day, and he's just doing exactly what I'm doing. But as he gets closer, his facial expression just seems creepy and off. The trail is surrounded by woods thick enough that if 2 people are passing each other, you both have to move to the side to get by. As I approach the man I am about to walk beside, he does not move from the center of the trail. I don't stop walking, and neither does he, and when he's about 4 feet in front of me, he proceeds to jump a bit towards me, spreading his arms out as if he will grab me and making it clear I cannot get around him on this trail. Of course I stop, and I believe my words were "what the duck?" I don't understand why I didn't run the other way. Maybe I froze, or maybe I realized that running back into the woods with this person possibly chasing me could end worse than whatever was happening right now. He then says the least reassuring thing ever, "Oh, I'm not going to hurt you." Still standing feet in front of me with arms outstretched so that I cannot get around him. That means you're definitely thinking about hurting me in my eyes. So he and I are at a standoff for probably 2 seconds when I remember I have pepper spray in my shorts. I pull it out and point in his direction and say, "I know you're not my husband, did you see him? He's in the museum, and I'm supposed to be there right now. I just wanted the guy to know that I wasn't alone so someone would be looking for me soon." At this point the guy moves over and lets me pass by. He heads into the woods while I sprint towards my husband and son, who are now standing outside the museum. I explain what just happened, and my husband is so upset because the guy is the reason he had just called me to ask me to come back. He said the guy just gave him an uncomfortable vibe, enough so that when the guy left the museum, my husband called because he didn't want me in the woods alone with that guy. We head towards the parking lot and see that aside from our car, the only other vehicle is a white truck that must belong to the creepy guy. We are getting into our car to leave when a creepy guy is coming out of the woods, so we watch him just get into his truck and drive away. The incident freaked me out even more because this man couldn't have been at the park for more than 5 minutes total. He parked, walked into and out of the museum, then went down a trail for at most 2 to 3 minutes. Why? To this day, I think he was looking for someone alone to do, I don't know what to do with. We weren't smart or quick enough to get a license plate number in case something did happen to someone because of this guy, and hopefully nothing ever did. But I was so truly thankful for my husband and pepper spray that day. A random man wanted me to get into the van with him because he didn't want to see me walking alone at night. I normally am a nighttime walker because I have a cat that roams as well. I sometimes like to make sure he's okay or that the roads are clear. I would rather not get into more details about my cat being outdoors, but I do come from a toxic, abusive family dynamic, and they won't allow him indoors. I'm also on disability, so yeah, I'm a loser still living at home. Anyways, I'm 36 years old, and I make sure I'm aware of my surroundings, and I take precautions when walking. I've had randoms stop and ask me a question sometimes, but I've never experienced something like this. So I walk out at midnight. I normally do a brisk walk, and I'm fine. But this time as I'm reaching the end of the street and I turn back to walk back home, a man in a big white van stops and asks me a question. He asks, "What am I doing, and where am I going?" And I say I'm walking back home. He then proceeds to suggest I take a lift home from him because he doesn't want to see me walk home alone late at night. I decline his request and ask him to leave me alone and that I can walk home safely if he carries on driving. He drives his van, makes a U-turn back to my location, and appears to be watching me walk home, possibly trying to determine where I live. I stop walking and wait for him to pass, but he doesn't. Instead, he also stops his van. He says to me he just wants me to go home safe and again asks me to get in his van, and I decline. Now I get furious, and I say, "Stop following me home. I'm a woman, I can't show you where I live." Then he drives off slowly but stops at my street, which was right up ahead. I decide to take a U-turn and run into one of the roads where I can hide. He doesn't show up, and I think he's gone, so I come out of hiding. I walk slowly just in case I see him. I then see a car's headlights approaching around the bend, and I quickly jump into this arrangement of big plants on the sidewalk. I easily duck down, and he doesn't see me. I see his white van driving really slow past me, and he turns into the road I had just come from. He then makes a U-turn and goes back the way he came from. I waited a while, and I felt like a cat at that moment, hiding and waiting for a safe time to come out again. Finally the coast was clear, and I couldn't see his van anywhere, so I made a run for home. Thank God I made it home safe and sound. I made sure to look around me and in the shadows to see if he parked his van anywhere, and I didn't see his van. I don't know who that man was and whether he was really looking out for my safety or whether he was up to something else. What do you guys think? I'm sitting beside myself now with a cup of tea trying to process what just happened. Camping in the desert. My dad is a journalist and nonfiction writer, but at the time he was a reporter for the Virginian Pilot, based out of Virginia. He was working on a new book titled The Big Roads when this occurred. We often went on road trips for his research needs, and once his proposal for this new book was accepted, we went on a cross-country road trip from Virginia to California and back on old Route 66 for the book. Me being 13 at the time, I demanded he let me bring a friend along, and so we were 3. The first quarter of our month-long adventure went off without a hitch. We either stayed in motels or, on occasion, at a grand old, historic hotel. My dad, being the outdoorsman hat he is, decided that we should camp about 5 or 6 times throughout the trip. The first night we camped, we were in the middle of literal nowhere. No one for at least 20 miles on either side in the middle of the Utah desert. When we arrived at our campsite in our rented minivan, my dad wanted to explore a bit because at the bottom of the hill that our campsite was situated on was an old Pony Express stop. My friend decided to stay in the minivan until my dad and I had finished checking out the Pony Express stop to set up camp on account of all of the wasps and bees. We were utterly alone, and as a rather jumpy and skittish 13-year-old girl, it became apparent we were isolated to the point that if anything happened, we would be screwed. That's all I could think about as my dad and I walked down the hill to explore. We checked out the old station, and everything was going smoothly until we were about halfway back up the hill. A large truck that we noticed driving down the old dirt road a few minutes before it turned into the campsite. We were surprised but really didn't think anything of it. Maybe this guy was on an adventure too. The truck parked halfway up the road, and a man got out. He had what I think was a hunting rifle and started hunting around the area my dad and I were in, about 50 feet from our campsite. Of course this was an absolute no hunting zone, and my dad became a bit concerned because my friend was closer to the stranger than she was to us. He yelled out to the man, saying that there were children around and he couldn't hunt there. As soon as the man turned to face us, I got an overwhelming sense of complete doom. I felt in my entire body that something was not right. The man looked us over, and without saying a word, aimed his gun at us. My dad does not carry a gun or knife or any kind of weapon. I felt trapped. My dad ushered me behind a large boulder, but he didn't hide, he stood his ground. There was a solid minute of this man aiming his gun at my dad and my dad standing completely still, staring back. In my mind I considered all of the ways this could go down. I was absolutely terrified this guy would shoot my dad, and somehow my friend and I would have to escape or get murdered during this tense minute. The guy lowered his gun, cocked his head to the side, and pointed at my dad using the fake gun fingers and fake shot him. He got in his truck and drove away. That night my friend and I slept in the minivan in 90-degree heat because I was positive this guy would come back and end us all. He didn't come back. A few other creepy incidents occurred on that trip, but we were fine and safe after all. Outdoor adventure. Back in 2008 I was working on my environmental science internship in a brand new place. Where I come from had an extremely low crime rate, lower than the average for the US, so maybe I was a little naive or just not expecting much to go wrong. Therefore, for my internship, I worked outdoors banding birds. My fellow worker and I had set up a new spot to band birds at this little secluded fishing access area. You could drive in from the main, somewhat rural route and head down to the lake. It also had a picnic area that no one ever seemed to use, so we set up shop there. We had our banding area up this forested rise that had 0 trails, and no one had a need to go anywhere near there for anything else other than what we were doing. My coworker would park at the bottom of the rise, so the car was pretty visible, which I later realized was rather dumb. We learned that gay guys used the spot to meet, so we felt somewhat safe as we saw them regularly and we'd wave to each other. One morning, things went as usual, and I was up near the top of the rise by myself. I have a habit of looking behind me, and this morning I noticed a car parked at the edge of the woods, right at the base of where we were working, right next to our car. I crouched down and moved around to see if I could see anybody down there and saw a man leave the car. I got ready to call out to him to tell him to please leave the area when he began taking off his clothes. He took off all of them and left them on the hood of his car. He then proceeded to take out a gallon jug of water and 2 of those large rectangular buckets that hold cement mix from his car. I had a chuckle at how strange this was while finding a dip near the top of the rise to hide in. I began to panic, however, as the man entered our work area and walked up the rise. I didn't know exactly where my coworker was, and he seemed to be headed right to where she had gone earlier. I called her on her cell and told her there was a naked man in the woods. She started screaming to get out of the woods and hung up on me to call the police. The problem was, there was no way out of the dip I was in without him seeing me when I got up, so I knew I'd have to book it. I got up, and he turned to face me directly, setting down his buckets and water before starting to walk towards me. I booked it down the rise to the parking lot until I found my coworker. The cops came, found the guy, took him in, and looked him up. He had traveled over an hour to this particular spot and never gave his motive as to what he was going to do there, but those cement buckets were both full of porn magazines. The cops showed us what came up when they searched him in their system: repeat violent offender. The man with wild eyes. I'm a 20-year-old girl. 2 years ago I started studying at my chosen university, thanks to which I had to move to one of the biggest cities in my country. I rented a flat in a residential block. As I learned, the area was calm and quiet but definitely not fancy. I got used to living there pretty quickly and made many new friends. Not long ago I decided to go to a party with my friend and her boyfriend. The event was taking place quite far away from my flat but seemed fun enough to give it a shot. We danced a bit, talked, and laughed. Eventually we got tired and decided to go home. They were going together, I was going alone. I wasn't too concerned, since I've done it a lot of times before, not to mention it was Friday, and even if it was around 2 a.m., there was still a large number of people around. I was walking and listening to music on my headphones. The air outside felt quite refreshing after the hours of partying. Eventually, I got to the front door of my block. At this point I felt completely safe since I was pretty much at home. I was looking for the keys in my purse, however, I had some trouble with it since it was dark. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I looked there and immediately felt paralyzed. Just a few steps away from me, there was a man who was almost completely naked. The only thing he was wearing was boots. He was walking past me very slowly and kept his eyes on me all the time. I'm not quite sure if it was because of the panic, but I especially remembered his expression. It seemed calm and collected, but there was some creepy wildness in his eyes. I remember them as very dark. He kept them focused on me, which made me feel even more unsettled. This man seemed to be in his mid to late 20s, maybe around 30 even. I'm a girl of a very petite build, I'm only about 5 feet 2 inches, and I remember thinking that I could never overpower him. I looked away from him, pretending not to be bothered, and tried to focus on finding the keys. I simply couldn't find the keys, which made my eyes fill with tears of frustration. I felt like I was in danger, yet at the same time, I was so close to safety. Meanwhile, this man walked a few meters past me. I didn't look at him, but I felt that he kept on observing me and my desperate attempts to find the keys. Something told me to check if my feeling was right, and I looked in his direction quickly. Of course, he kept his focus on me all that time. Once he saw that I looked at him, he turned back and started walking towards me again. My heart started to pound even faster as I tried to find the damn keys even more desperately, knowing he's getting closer. I think I was crying at that point because it just seemed so surreal. When I finally found the keys, I pretty much attacked the doors with them and jumped right in. When I turned back, this guy was just standing there, looking at me through the window. The thought of how close he was to getting to me before I jumped through the door seemed absolutely terrifying. We stared at each other through the window for a few more seconds, then he just turned right and left. I finally felt safe. By the time I was in my room, it was almost 4 a.m., and I had no idea what to do with myself. I called my BF, who insisted that I should call the police, but I was too scared and tired to do this at that time. I kept on thinking about all the what ifs and about how lucky I was that nothing happened. After that, I decided to stop walking by myself at night, and if I absolutely have to do this, I call somebody and talk with them till I'm in my flat. This whole situation taught me that danger can be found in any place, even the one you feel safe in. Camping and night visitors. I am going to preface this a little bit, I am not an outdoors woman. I like camping once in a while, but I don't really live for it. My dad is an outdoorsman. He hunts, fishes, and camps. Camping shaped many of my childhood memories, teaching me the importance of packing in and packing out properly. Never leave food out, always keep it sealed and off the ground, and never walk through another person's camp unless it is family or you have permission to do so. Just camping basics to keep yourself safe and keep animals away. I have been married 12 years, and every year my husband's family hosts a family reunion, which is a huge camping trip in a national forest with a huge lake. My husband and I will probably only go camping once this year, so we usually go to the mountains to escape the city. We have a daughter who is almost 3, and our son is 8 months old. Our daughter wanted to sleep in the trailer with Grandma and Grandpa, and we decided it was best to keep our son in our tent with us because he wakes up at 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. and then starts up for the day around 8 a.m., and I didn't want anyone to miss out on a full night's rest because my little man wakes up a lot. On the second night, I unexpectedly woke up in the pitch darkness, desperately needing a bathroom break. I found myself with two options: to make the 2 to 3 minute walk to the outhouse or to relieve myself outside my tent. There was no way I was making it to the outhouse. I turned my lantern on and checked on my son. He was still snoozing peacefully, so I got my shoes on and went outside to do my business. The moon was out but hidden behind clouds, so I could make out outlines of the trees, but everything was still shrouded in darkness, and the only other light source I had was the soft glow coming from my tent. I finished up, and as I was pulling my pants up, I had this urge to rush back to my tent, like a walk while I'm pulling up my pants type of rush. Just 1 minute I was fine, and the next I went into a semi-state of panic. When I returned to my tent, my son began to stir, which helped calm my panic. I prepared his bottle, arranged his blankets to keep him warm, and turned on his little lullaby octopus. By the time I got back into bed and turned the lantern off, he was already back to sleep. I lay there for a few minutes watching the blue and purple lights bounce off the tent walls while Rockabye Baby played. I couldn't fall asleep with the music playing, so I got out of bed, turned off the octopus, and snuggled back under the covers, but I couldn't relax. If you haven't been camping, it's almost total darkness unless the moon is full, and your eyes play tricks on you so you can never be certain if what you see is real unless there is sound to it. As I lay there, I could see shadows moving outside my tent. I just told myself that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But even then, I felt this sense of unease and started to think about the slight panic I had felt outside not even 10 minutes prior. So I just laid there and watched at least 3 large shadows move past the side of the tent my son was sleeping next to in the front of my tent. I lay awake for a brief while longer and didn't see anything else, so I was able to relax and fall asleep. My son awoke around 7 that morning and was unwilling to return to sleep, so I dressed him, prepared some coffee, and appreciated the relatively peaceful morning. My sister-in-law soon joined me at camp, and we started talking. She said that she woke up at about 2:15, needed to go to the bathroom, and since she couldn't make it to the outhouse, she decided to pee outside the tent. When she finished, she got back in the tent, and just before dozing off, Her dog got super fidgety and started walking around the tent, pacing and sniffing the ground. She thought the dog might have had to go out too, but then the dog started growling, not barking but just a low growl, and that's when she started to hear the noises outside her tent. She thought it sounded like a big animal, quiet, but you could hear the twigs snap right next to her tent or the rustle of a bush. She woke her husband up, and they listened for the noises together until he fell asleep, after which she eventually fell asleep as well. I ended up telling her about my experience with the shadows I saw outside my tent just shortly after she heard the noises. Of course, we joked that the noises could be caused by Sasquatch or a deer, but here is the important point. The campgrounds were full, there were maybe 2 empty camping spots left in this area. We had all been making a bunch of noise just 3 hours before this, and all food had been sealed and put away before everyone went to their tents and trailers. While it is possible an animal went through our camp, I would like to point out a couple of things. There were no deer tracks, there were no bear tracks, and nothing had been disturbed. But there were shoe prints in the dirt near my tent, and they were not made by my flip-flops. Our camp was set up so my in-laws' trailer was in between our tents, so there was a good distance in between our tents, and with the fire pit and tables further separating us. This means whoever was in our camp literally hung out and potentially watched me pee outside. While I was tending to my son and getting him to go back to sleep, they stayed. They stayed until I shut off the octopus that plays lullabies and quietly left our camp, hoping to not be seen or heard. Even if someone wanted to take a stroll around the campgrounds on a Friday at 2:30 in the morning, there would be hushed voices and flashlights. Not silence, and I am sure they would have walked on the road, considering that there are stakes in the ground and ropes that you can trip over because of the canopies and tents. Anyways, my aunt had rented a cabin that is located up a little dirt road across from the campground entrance, and she had showed up around 6:30 p.m. Friday night. Apparently, when she and her kids were unloading the truck, a beat-up car made its way up the dirt road. My aunt said the lady in the car looked like a junkie and was asking super weird questions, like if she had seen some guy, and she asked if my aunt and her kids were staying at the cabin. When she told the lady that she had rented it for the weekend, the lady looked super irritated and ended the conversation, turned around, and sped back down the dirt road. I have a feeling that either the person that this lady was looking for or possibly both of them and a friend were making their way through the camps in the middle of the night. In all the years I have been going there, that was the first time anything like this happened. We were in a national forest. The area we were in has one road in and out, and it takes about 30 minutes to get down the mountain and into an adjacent town. So I don't know what their intentions were, but something wasn't right that night. Followed in the wilderness. Ever since I was a teenager, I've spent many summer/fall weekends in Utah's Uinta Mountains camping, fishing, backpacking, and hunting. Part of this east-west trending range is designated as wilderness and is adorned with 10,000 feet plus peaks and countless lakes. Every summer I take at least 2 trips into this area of the Uintas to backpack and fish the lakes for trout. This area is intersected by few roads and a network of numerous trails. The weekends bring urban Utah crowds, and the trails can be packed. The weekdays are slower, and you can usually have a lake to yourself. This event took place on a weekday. The wilderness portion of this range has always been spooky to me. No matter where I go in the high Uintas, I feel like I'm being watched. The stunning beauty of the area keeps me coming back and outweighs the sense of dread that I sometimes feel there. We decided to hike up to the Kuberant Basin area. There are several lakes close together, and the fishing was rumored to be good. This basin gained unfortunate notoriety several years ago when a 12-year-old Boy Scout went missing without a trace after walking a quarter-mile back to camp to change his socks. A massive search was initiated. Hundreds of people combed the area, and not a sign of the kid was found. I always thought he was abducted, but SAR blamed it on the rough terrain and cold temperatures at 10,000 feet. With that kid's disappearance and the aforementioned general spooky feeling of the area weighing on my mind, I was slightly apprehensive of choosing this lake as our destination. However, this was to be a short trip, and this relatively short, easy hike, 3 miles one way, was one of the only lakes we hadn't visited that also fit into our time frame. We hiked in and spent 2 nights. The time at the lake went by without incident. We had exclusive access to the entire lake and did not encounter another person for 2 days. It was great. The encounter happened on our way out. Part of the trail went up and over a land peninsula of sorts that jutted out from the side of the mountain. The trail ascended 200 feet up a rock field, traveled for a short time on flat ground through some pines, and then descended 200 feet through a rock field on the other side. This portion of the trail was the steepest part of the hike, so we took some time to rest on top of the peninsula. I should add that we had a dog with us, free roaming out in front of us the whole time as well. After we had descended through the boulder field down the other side of the peninsula, I happened to look back up the trail we had just come from 3 to 4 minutes earlier. What I saw really spooked me. There was a man standing behind a boulder next to the trail watching us descend. As soon as he realized I had seen him, he ducked behind the boulder. At first I tried to brush this off and rationalize why he was there. We weren't that far from a trailhead, and the trail was well used. It wasn't that strange for someone to be there. The only distinguishing features I remember about the man are that he was bald and not wearing a backpack. I took a few more steps and turned around to look again. As before, I saw the man duck behind a rock when he was seen. But this time he was closer. I thought maybe I was seeing things, so I alerted the others in my group of what was going on. We all looked back at the same time and caught him hiding once again. He was getting closer each time, as if he was trying to follow us without us knowing. At that point everyone was freaked out, and we picked up our pace and hightailed it to the truck, never looking back. Maybe it was just my eerie predisposition to the area that made the encounter scary. For all I know, it could have just been some guy messing with us. But the others in my group were frightened as well. We had lots of questions. Why didn't we see him as we traversed that portion of the trail? Why didn't our dog see him? Why was he hiding? Why was he following us? After getting home and researching, I realized that we were camping in the exact same campsite as the 12-year-old scout disappeared from. That realization and the experience with the man following us made me vow to never go back to that basin ever again. The hills were screaming. This past weekend, I and my boyfriend went away for a short break to the Shropshire countryside. For those who are not familiar, it is close to the Welsh borders, is stunningly beautiful, and is known for its sprawling hills and rural feel. The village we stayed in particular, was gorgeous, and the Airbnb we rented was set on a private road, with no other houses on it, directly facing the hills. It must have been on farmer's land, unsure, as the host was not a farmer nor did he live on site, because the fields surrounding us were full of sheep, goats, and horses. Honestly, it could not have been more idyllic. The location was ideal for a short, romantic weekend getaway. The first 2 nights of staying there were great. We were out walking, exploring, hiking, and generally being tourists all day long, so we're not getting back to the place until later in the afternoon/early evening. Typically showering, cooking dinner, and chilling out. The rain had been on and off, so sitting out on the paved, raised terrace was not always an option, so we spent a lot of the night indoors, apart from when we would go outside for a smoke. The last night, however, it was perfectly dry and clear, so after coming home, showering, eating, and changing, we took a pot of coffee and sat in the near pitch black dark, looking over at hills and up at the clearest sky I had ever seen. Being rural, there were, of course, lots of animal noises around us. The sheep and horses, in particular, can make one jump when unexpected, and they let off a sound or two, but there was nothing unusual about any of the country sounds we were hearing. Until I heard a scream. Yes, I am a city girl, and yes, I am not used to the sound of the outdoors as such, but I know that this scream is not normal. It was high-pitched, and it was close. My boyfriend didn't really react to it, instead telling me that it sounded like a deer. For the most part, he is a very clued-up guy, he doesn't tend to overreact and freak out. He says I do it enough for both of us anyway, so I listened and did not overthink it. Instead, I went back to stargazing and was so lost in that I did not even see my other half rise up and walk to the edge of the sensor light, looking out over the fields. When I did notice, I asked him what he was trying to look out for, seeing as it was now pitch black out, and he said to me that he saw something walk along the fence. Me being me, I freaked out, jumped up, and rushed to him straight away, because, yeah, I get creeped out easily, and as soon as I grabbed his hand, as if on cue, the screaming started again. But this time, it was more than one voice, and it was coming from multiple directions. I kid you not when I say I ran back into that house as quick as you can imagine, with my boyfriend following me. Now remember, I have been told that it was deer, yet I still locked the door and pulled the blind down over the glass before turning to him to ask what the hell that noise was. I have absolutely no bloody idea, but it sounded like people. Not what I needed to hear. He would not lie to me knowing how freaked out I get, and for him to say that, he believed it. Needless to say, I was terrified and not looking forward to the night ahead. We could not hear them from inside, yet about an hour or so later, after calming me down somewhat, he went outside for a smoke, leaving me on the couch, and when he returned, he looked white. It was quiet as anything when I went out till the sensor light came on, and the screaming started again. Nope. We left the next day, and I have spent the last couple days trying to work it out. I am sure there is a plausible explanation, although I have no idea what it is, and despite my love of the paranormal, I am not putting it down to that. All I know is it was human-like screams in the middle of the rural countryside, with nobody else around, in the pitch black dark. That has to be enough to creep anyone out. Right? This happened about 13 years ago in Chatsworth Park. My buddy and I used to go for late night hikes in the back of the park and smoke weed. I know, I've matured since then. One night we were there doing our usual thing, and we had just gotten about a mile down the trail, about to cross over the second ridge to get to our usual spot. Before we crossed over, we noticed some lights on the other side on a different trail, just over the ridge. As we got a bit closer, we realized it was a small group of people carrying lanterns. We then noticed all of them were in hooded robes, and we could hear voices all saying something in unison. My buddy said, "What the duck?" And we saw them stop and turn towards us. Both of us, full-grown and decent-sized men, ran like cowards back down the hill until we were at the break in the gate that we would slip through. I never found out what that was all about. Maybe cultists or some sort of ritual? That time we had to use our code word. It was 2012, and my best friend Hannah had convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. She had, after searching for the longest time, found her dream car and intended to travel the 900 kilometers to the very north of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand two-door Suzuki Vitara in a purplish kind of color, and I must admit I didn't share her obsession with it. But, with her being the closest thing to a sister that I will ever get, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I have always had each other, from the cradle and onwards. Sharing each other's love for adventure, we have traveled the world together. At the time this happened we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip in Asia. The man who was selling her the car had agreed to meet us at the small airport in Umeå. When we arrived shortly before lunchtime, it had started to snow heavily. The first snow of the season, no less. The parking lot was almost empty, and when I saw the man standing outside the Vitara, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter. A lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle with hunting and fishing, so there's nothing strange with that really. But still, there was something about him that made me uneasy. He was nice though, smiling and waving to us, shaking hands with us both before walking us around the car and pointing out all the tiny little flaws. He showed us the work he had done on the car and showed the paperwork from the recently done engine repairs. He made the impression that he didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he made a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snowing had now intensified, and we were getting cold. He opened the car door for us and said, "I got the paperwork at home, let's close the deal over some coffee." Against all my instincts, I climbed in after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. I had no reason to feel threatened by this man who had been nothing but pleasant to us, other than the alarm bells going off inside my head. I can't tell what it was that made me feel that way, but there must have been some sign that something was wrong, something that my subconscious tuned into. The man was constantly talking, funny, since people from the north of Scandinavia are famous for never speaking a word more than absolutely necessary. He showed us the stereo and told us about the features of the car, the places we drove past, and the wildlife and nature. There was not a silent moment. After about 20 minutes I started to notice that we were in no way moving in the direction of civilization. Instead, it seemed we were driving further and further into the vast wilderness. It struck me that he had us in the back of a two-door car, driving us into unknown territory, and no one knew where we were. I looked at Hannah, who was happily listening to the man telling stories about the area, and I noticed she didn't look at all worried. Maybe I was totally overreacting. We drove past a group of people standing by the side of the road, hunters planning their day or taking a break, maybe. This truly is a very different Sweden compared to the city. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no neighboring houses, apart from a small cabin that we drove past a few hundred meters down the road, but it had looked empty. We followed the man inside. He was still talking non-stop and continued to do so until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking things about the car, and I could sense that her voice had a new undertone now, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she too had started to feel that something wasn't right. "I'll put the kettle on," he said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair, and he smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely and made my way to the door with the little red heart on it. I was washing my hands when I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror. Something was hidden behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled-up plastic folder, and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. They were very violent, explicit pictures that looked like they had been cut out from magazines, and they were glued to the paper, surrounded by cut-out pieces of handwritten text. Put together, they made a horrifying story about how a woman was lured into a car with the promise of getting to buy the car cheaply, and then it quickly turned into a horror story. I know this will sound silly, but when we traveled together, Hannah and I had a code word for whenever we felt it was time to get out of a situation. We had never needed to use it, just joked about it, but now it was helpful. I walked out of the bathroom and looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes. We forgot to buy potatoes. And that's too bad, because good God do we need some." The look on my face must have told her that the situation was no joke, and she said, "Oh, should we get some as soon as possible?" "The sooner the better," I replied. Hannah, always pretty and charming and capable of great acting, casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, tapped his shoulder, and said, "Excuse me, but I was wondering if I can go have a quick look at the cam belt?" He huffed something about it being in good shape and handed over the keys. We got into the car and sped off faster than the weather strictly speaking allowed. We left the car at the airport and hoped we hadn't made a terrible mistake. What if he reported it stolen? It would be embarrassing to explain to the police. But nothing happened. He didn't follow us, didn't report it in. We had to take the train since we had no plane tickets. The original plan had been to take the car home, and we didn't want to linger close to the airport in case he came looking for us. Later Hannah asked what made me use the code word, and I told her about what I had found. It might just have been a fantasy, a sick game, and maybe he would never have done anything to us. But right then and there I was convinced we would die if we didn't get out. Thank God Hannah didn't need any convincing or proof, just the code word. I truly think that if we hadn't talked about it so many times before, about how we would handle a situation where we need to get out fast, things would have ended differently. Both of us understood that if one of us ever used the code word, it was time to leave without further questions. Just move. Creepy guy at scout camp. This story takes place back when I was 13. Every year at the beginning of the summer I would go to Boy Scout camp. That week I had been taking the merit badge lifesaving. It's a merit badge at the waterfront that focuses on safety in the water, ways to rescue someone who could drown, etc. There was a scout who was not in my troop, who we'll call JT. I don't remember how old he was, but he was probably around 14 or 15. He was not very athletic but looked physically large due to how fat he was. Other than being an overall asshole, he seemed to target me in particular. He often made fun of my size. I was small for my age and very skinny, and would go out of his way to demonstrate his athletic prowess over me. Granted, I was a weakling, but feeling proud of your victory over the smallest, skinniest guy in the merit badge class was a low blow. Also, he would often say that I looked like a girl. I hadn't hit puberty yet, and my face was a bit feminine, so the comments weren't completely out of the blue but were rude nonetheless. But he wasn't just rude. He was creepy. I would catch him staring at me from time to time, and he would always seem to rush to get next to me. After 5 days of this, I had become very scared of JT. Being a shy, antisocial person, I'm the kind of person to simply deal with a situation like this instead of telling authorities, so my problems with him stayed under wraps. Around the camp, there were several outdoor shower houses, essentially a wooden rectangle upon a concrete floor with a wall separating the changing room and the shower room. The main shower room had about 8 shower heads with no stall or barrier to separate you from anyone else showering. I'm not sure if we were supposed to do this, but everybody in my troop and most people from other troops just wore swimming trunks when we showered. It was fine as long as we washed down there at some point. So it's the morning of the last day of camp, and I am taking a shower by myself. As I said, I'm antisocial, so I like to take my showers alone, which was actually against the rules. In walks JT. I don't say anything and try to pretend I don't see him, though I am feeling nervous. I steal a glance at him to find that he is staring at me. As I continue to try to ignore him, I feel his eyes on me. I'm feeling terrified, but I push through and decide to look him in the eyes. He was still staring at me, now completely naked. His face was blank and almost emotionless. His eyes were slightly widened, and his nose flared. I could tell he was breathing heavily. I pack up my soap, still staring at him, and start towards the doorway to the changing room. To my horror, he also heads towards the doorway at a faster speed, hoping to intercept me. Suddenly, we hear the door to the changing room creak open and slam shut, along with the voices of a group of people entering the shower house. JT's face falls, and he stops in his tracks. I continue to move quickly, putting on my shirt and shoes before leaving without looking back. I try not to think about what might have happened if those guys hadn't entered the shower house at that moment. I don't have many experiences like this one, so it really sticks out in my mind. I never saw JT again after that, and I hope it stays that way. Creepy van drivers in the woods. This happened a couple of years ago, and it's time to get it off my chest. I was around 18, and for a period of time I was very physically active. I had struggled with some undesirable habits brought on by excessive partying, and exercise proved very helpful in this regard. I regularly went jogging. Mind you, at the time I lived in a small town in the ever so peaceful Scandinavia. Out all by myself jogging in the woods. Not a soul in sight, right? Since my class didn't start until around noon, I decided to go out for a morning jog. Broad daylight and everything. I went on my bike to the tracks and left my bike at the jogging station. Dunno what else to call it, it was a small red cottage where different outdoor clubs hung out. As I am about to enter the tracks, there are two middle-aged men sitting by the cottage. I glance at them only to find myself locking eyes with one of them. The way he looked at me was deeply unsettling. It was only for a moment, but I'll never forget how I felt when his eyes pierced right through me. My gut is making an honest effort trying to tell me that something is off about this whole situation. These men are wearing jeans and leather jackets. They sure aren't here for the sake of exercise. But I brush it off, thinking I'm overreacting. I was wrong. I had only been jogging for a couple of minutes when I suddenly felt like turning around. And there they are. In a white minivan, following me on the tracks. I feel that man's devilish eyes on me again. Oh no, oh no. I'm doing my best trying to think of a logical, non-threatening reason for them to follow me. Can't really think of one that makes sense. So I'm trying to work out what on earth I'm going to do. I don't want to make it obvious that I'm downright terrified. If I start running as fast as I can, I'm turning myself into prey. No one else is here. No one. It won't matter how loud I scream. Fortunately, I've been on these tracks a number of times, so I know there is going to be a sharp curve not so far away. So I try to act as if I'm not the least bothered by the whole situation. As soon as I pass the curve and I'm out of their vision for a short while, I sprint into the woods as if my life depends on it and hide behind a small rock. I'm crouching down as I see the white vehicle pass the sharp curve. Soon they're out of my sight, but I dare not move. I know that when they pass the curve and notice I'm nowhere to be seen, they'll know I've run off somewhere. After the curve the trail is in a straight line for quite some time. They'll know I'm not on the tracks anymore. So I stay put. Thinking that if they are after me, they will come back. If I'm overreacting, they'll carry on doing whatever they are doing, and I won't be seeing them again. But the white van came back. At this point my memory is a bit vague. I won't even breathe, dreading that the slightest movement will give me away. I can't fully remember if the van stopped and the dominant man went outside, or if they simply passed the curve again very slowly, looking for me. But I do vividly remember when the little van went back where it came from. I was somewhat relieved, though still a bit worried. The thing is, all tracks lead back to the cottage, where these men are likely to be. I then decide to carry on deeper into the woods, glancing over my shoulder every now and then to make sure no one is there. My sense of direction is somewhat okay when I'm in forest for some reason. I'm useless otherwise. Anyway, I know that there will be a highway if I just keep on going. I'm reaching the highway and making my way home from there. It usually takes half an hour walking from where I live to the tracks. This journey home took 3 to 4 hours. Totally worth it. But I can't remember if I ever went to pick up my bike. I do not know what intentions these men had. I doubt they were good. And I do not know what was in that van. I should have called the police on you creeps. A camping horror story. My boyfriend and I love to camp. About 2 weeks ago we decided to go to the coast because we had a Friday off from our classes at university and decided to hike and camp out for the weekend. We had a 3-day plan to stay in 3 different towns and hike to each place. This story is about the first place we stayed in. The first town resembled more of a collection of small houses and farmland with very few residents than an actual town. It was off-season, so normally there would be some tourists there since the main attraction is a huge abandoned city left over from the times of the ancient Greek civilization. Anyway, since there were 5 to 6 camping grounds available, one of which was highly recommended on TripAdvisor and the like, we didn't bother calling beforehand. We simply headed to that camping area directly. Upon reaching it, we saw the gate open, not really so unusual, but when we entered it, no one seemed to be there. We knocked and called out for someone, and no one responded, except the outdoor bar was all open with expensive bottles of alcohol lined up and food left on the kitchen table, as we saw from the window, so they couldn't have gone far. My boyfriend found it a bit strange they would leave everything open like that, but assuming it was a small community with no crime, we didn't think more. We went to some other camping grounds to ask if they are open. The first one we went to said they were closed because their grounds were very messy these days, but they recommended us another place. We asked them about the first ground we had gone to, and strangely, the man said, "Don't go there." When we asked why, he said, just don't. I don't really recommend you going there." Anyway, the other place he told us about was also closed, and luckily in the meantime I found a signboard for the first place, and it had their number on it. We called them, and a man picked up and told us that he and his wife, who run the place, are out for a couple of hours but will be back by the evening. He said we could set up our camp and that we would meet later. The place was a bit secluded, but it was quite picturesque, and we set up our camp and left. After a tiring day of exploring and hiking, we started heading back around 10 p.m., shortly after dinner. This is where things got extra creepy. When we got back, we found the place still empty. No one had returned, and it was quite late. My boyfriend called up the owners again, and they said they had decided not to return tonight but that we could leave the money under a table mat by the bar. They said the kitchen and bathrooms are open if we need to use them. The place was dark, and the yard where we had set the camp up was huge and without lighting. My boyfriend immediately started to feel a bit uneasy. He was concerned why two business owners would leave their property completely open to two total strangers with a bar full of unopened bottles and a half-open house. As we walked towards our camp, he kept subtly expressing his uneasiness and kept looking around. He's usually pretty calm, so I told him if he's really feeling so strongly about this, we can just go to the pension where we had dinner earlier and stay the night there in a hotel room. He opened the flashlight of his phone and kept looking around, getting more and more uneasy. We agreed to pack up our camp and leave. I began to pack it up since it requires a lot of folding, and he was already anxious. I told him to just stand still and hold the light for me while I packed up the camp. Except constantly he would move the light and check the area, and I kept getting irritated because I could sense his worry, and at the same time I couldn't pack fast enough because I couldn't see. At one point he even told me in a slightly bitchy way to hurry it up, and as soon as I folded the camp, we stuffed it into its bag and hurriedly packed our shit and scooted. He still seemed super anxious, and I told him to relax. Just telling this part gives me the chills all over again. The road back to the main area of the town was dark and lonely, and this is when he told me, there's something I wanted to say, but not while we were still in the grounds. Well, what is it? I asked. He hesitated, then said he would rather not freak me out, but he was sure that he saw someone lurking in the dark behind the wooden cabins and by the bathrooms twice. No one was supposed to be there except us. I got the chills, but I still tried to rationalize, saying it's a farm area, there are lots of animals. Maybe a cat moving around. But he was adamant it was a human figure walking like one would and standing. That is why he kept checking and wanted to hurry so much. And that's why he was telling me to hush up and keep my voice down. At that moment, I felt tears welling in my eyes, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I kept looking back and was almost running at this point to the lighted area of the quiet town and only really relaxed until we reached the pension and booked a room there, got the key, and locked and checked it twice. I am generally a skeptical person, but I really do believe my boyfriend didn't just see things. I don't know who was back there or what could have happened, if anything, and I don't care. Dark and isolated places have always creeped me out anyway. Person lurking in the dark, let's never ever meet. Held captive by a man in rural Louisiana, the time my friends and I learned a valuable lesson. This happened about 20 years ago when I was a junior in high school in southern Louisiana. At this time a few friends and I would go out canoeing on the weekends. One of our friends lived right next to a local river, and we would park a car at a landing several miles downstream from his property and then drive back to his house and canoe back down to the landing. It would usually take us a few hours because we would take our time, take breaks to swim, or stop and eat on riverbank beaches along the way. On this day in particular there were 4 of us. All are males, 16 to 17 years old. Before we got on the river this day, our friend, whose property was on the river, remarked about a weird place he and another friend had seen on the river on a prior trip. He described it as a cult compound that was set back from the river a few yards in the woods. He said he would be able to remember the little ramshackle dock that was built on the river in front of it if he saw it. In our teenage minds we thought it would be the perfect adventure for the day to try and find and explore this cult compound if we could. Only in the mind of a 16-year-old boy would it seem like a great idea to go walk around uninvited at a creepy structure in the woods. Thus, we embarked on our journey with our typical exuberance. It was a beautiful day, and we were having a good time. After a while, our friend sees a dirt road that leads away from the riverbank into the woods. He said he thinks this road would lead to the weird place. So we bank the canoes and start down this dirt road. Not too long on the road, though, and we began to get attacked by a swarm of horseflies. To this day it was the most horseflies I have ever encountered. We decided to cancel our little trip down this road and ran as fast as possible back to the canoes. Surprisingly the horseflies didn't follow us back to the canoes, and we continued down the river on our merry way. Now I wonder what would have happened if we continued walking down that road but also regretted not taking it as a hint to stop our search for the cult compound. A little after that, though, our friend sees the handmade dock that he mentioned earlier. So we decide to dock there and continue our adventure. We climbed up the bank of the river and walked into the wood line. After a few steps I could see it. In a clearing was a 2-story shack built from an assortment of lumber, tarps, and billboards. It was about the time that I noticed the moat dug around it that I realized, oh, a crazy person lives here, we should probably leave. But before the words could leave my mouth, we saw him walking towards us. He looked a lot like Charles Manson with his unkempt brown hair and woolly beard. He was wearing khaki shorts and an Abita beer t-shirt and had something shiny and metallic in his hand that I thought was a knife. He said to us, "Turn around." I thought this was a wonderful idea, so we turned around to walk back to the canoes. He then said, "Not that way," and then bam! Fires a shot into some bushes next to him. I realized at that point it was a pistol he had and not a knife. He then led us to his clearing and sat us down in the dirt. I looked above us and noticed that we were sitting under a log that was being suspended by ropes and pulleys. I don't know if he could have pulled some switch and dropped the log on us or what lol. So he starts to rant and rave to us about all the people that he has shot before who have tried to steal from him. He said that he's also had his dogs attack people before and proceeded to tell dogs that we couldn't see or hear to shut up and stop barking. And I think to myself, well, I'm going to die. It was weird because I wasn't panicked and remember thinking that I was kind of lucky because most people don't get to know when and where and how they will die, but I did. I know, it's weird, and I have no idea why I was thinking that or how exactly it comforted me lol. Then I remember getting a little sad that my parents may never find my body or find out what happened to me. He kept ranting, and I remember thinking that I would stay calm and compliant, but if he started shooting, tried to tie us up, or tried to make us go in his shack, I would try and fight him for the gun. I would have preferred to confront the situation rather than be restrained and endure an alternative form of terror. He tells us that he needs our information so he can call the police. I was really relieved at that notion and wanted to say, yes, call the police right now. Lol. He goes into his truck, which was an old beat-up Toyota Tacoma type truck, and starts to look for paper and a pen. He couldn't find any paper, so he handed us a small piece of lumber and told us to write our names and addresses on it. 3 of us wrote fake names and addresses because we didn't want this guy to know where we lived, but a 4th actually wrote down his real name and address. His rants continued, and he told us that he fought in Vietnam, and often the Vietnamese would sneak up and attack in groups of 3 and 4, just like we were doing. I decided to try and make small talk with him and say, "So you were in the military?" So he starts to tell us that his shack was actually built by the Navy and transported down the river to this location. He said he was in the Navy and trained Marines in martial arts. He regaled us with other stories and kind of switched from angry, menacing rants to happy, friendly ranting. He says that he could tell that we aren't there to rob him because we don't have any buckets. He tells us that his parents always welcomed guests here, and he was happy to do the same. He proceeded to tell us to stand up and walked us back to our canoes. He tells us we are always welcome to come back, and if we need a name to call this place, we could call it Skull Island because his parents and the bones of several dogs were buried here. Our same friend who wrote his real name and address down says, "Oh, I'm never coming back here." We elbowed him, whispered for him to be quiet, and waved goodbye to our host. We then got back in the canoes and paddled in silence the whole way back. I was worried that at any point he was following us in the woods with a rifle, ready to switch back to menacing mode and decide to take us out. But, thankfully we made it back to the landing and were able to drive off in peace. After the 4 of us had a group hug, lol. So the lesson is, if you don't already know it, never trespass on people's land in the woods, especially if you already know the place is supposed to be creepy, lol. Looking back as I got older, I felt bad for the man. He most likely had some mental health issues and was living in a place where he just wanted to be left alone. He shouldn't have had to deal with a bunch of teenage boys near his place and may have had people try and steal from him before. I'm doubtful if he ever shot anyone before, but I am definitely thankful, though, that it didn't end worse for us. Summer camp. May as well share. Maybe telling the story will help me to stop thinking about it now that my children are getting older and may start asking to attend a summer camp someday. I was a counselor at a popular girls' summer camp in my hometown area of the state. Well, actually I was the craft director, which gave me a bit more freedom and a nicer place to sleep. But this was a camp that I had attended myself as a girl, and when I was in college, I went back to work there. I loved this camp. It meant a great deal to me, and I knew all the trails, all the different camping areas for the girls, the secret way to get underneath the swinging bridge, how to hike up the ridge the back way. I had spent a great deal of time there and always felt comfortable and safe. There were no signs identifying this camp on the roads leading up to it, so everyone who ever worked there or attended camp there always felt a certain sense of freedom from the world. At least I know I certainly did. I never thought twice about walking around the camp late at night with just a flashlight that I normally kept off. After living outside like that for a while, your eyes got very used to the dark, and you relied on the moonlight to guide you. Being the craft director, I was often up late at night running the kiln for the ceramics the girls made or watching the fire when the girls made primitive pottery. It was a fun job, and I always loved it. The camp was set down in an area with lots of big trees, vines, brush, and a stream that ran through it. There was a nice ridge that made for great climbing and gave a great view once you got to the top. Behind the ridge was a cattle pasture that was held by a local cattleman and was not accessible from any roads. You would have had to travel over this cattleman's lands to get to this ridge. Unless you walked in by the front gates of this camp. And if you walked in this way, you would have had to go through a locked gate, a tall fence, the caretaker's house, which was a middle-aged man and his wife, and the camp director's cabin, and walked at least a mile to get to the ridge. This is important to remember. The craft house was on the ridge, so you could look down on it from the ridge. There were several times other counselors would play pranks on me by sneaking up on me late at night when I was there, or by tossing little pebbles off the ridge to hit the roof of the craft house. I became used to little noises and other young girls trying to scare each other. We all did it, it was funny and all in good fun. That's why I didn't take what was starting to happen seriously. It was my third summer out there as the craft director, and I was pretty used to strange noises, animals running around at night, and taps on the windows that I blew off as other counselors playing pranks. This is when the flower bouquets began. They were just little bouquets that were left on the front doorstep of the craft house, on the side door, and on the outdoor potting wheel. A couple of times I found them inside the craft house. But that wasn't a concern, as I always kept the craft house unlocked, as there were bathrooms inside, and the girls and counselors always knew they could stop there if they really had to go. I also had a fridge that I kept stocked with some water and snacks. It was often pretty hot in the summer, and for our campers it was always a new thing for them to be out in the heat, and they often forgot to drink their water. The bouquets were small, like something a girl who admired you would do. I always tried to draw out the girls who were having a hard time fitting in at camp, and I really thought this was just a way for one of them to tell me, "Thank you." I always put them in a vase by the entrance door and always told all the girls how lovely it was for someone to leave me flowers. I figured the girl who left them would enjoy hearing it. Boy, was I ever naive. Or stupid. But probably both. I was up there late at night about 2 weeks after the flowers started running the kiln. I preferred to stay up with it running, as it got very hot, and I was paranoid the thing would catch fire and burn the whole damn camp down. I started hearing some tapping on the back windows, which I ignored. I was used to the pranks by now, being a seasoned counselor, and wasn't in the mood to provide jokes for anyone. They kept at it, and I yelled out to stop, or I was going to return the pranks in full with some spiders in a bed or maybe a snake. I heard laughter after that, but it sounded wrong. It wasn't a girl's laughter, it sounded like a man. I turned around to the window and caught sight of a pair of eyes looking at me, and I grabbed my walking hoe. We all carried one of these that we used to kill rattlesnakes with. Can't have rattlesnakes around our young campers, and ran out of the building to see someone running off to the edge of the woods/brush behind the craft house. At first I thought I must have heard wrong, a man's laughter? I was losing my mind due to the late hour, but I went to the director's cabin and woke her up anyway. She was pissed at me but got up and woke the other counselors, and we combed the area, finding nothing. She got up the caretaker, who was even more pissed, and helped us look. We found nothing. I wasn't very popular the next morning at breakfast, but I had to say something. I mean, we had little girls out there, for goodness sake, we were responsible for their welfare, and I would have been wrong not to say something and get everyone up. It was reported to the local sheriff, and the summer continued as usual. They stopped for a while, and I began to think I imagined the whole thing and maybe needed more sleep. I think everyone else just thought I was the victim of a prank by another counselor. Or some of the older campers. During the last week of active camp, the flowers began to bloom again. But they were everywhere. Everywhere. Outside my cabin, inside my cabin, at the craft house, and at the bathhouse I used. I started throwing them away. I was freaked out. I was always second-guessing everything I did, paying more attention to my surroundings, and hoping I was overreacting. Water and snacks were missing from the fridge. Everyone thought I was maybe having a breakdown and needed a break. The last bouquet was bigger and at the front door of the craft house. When I saw it, I threw it directly in the trash can. This was out of hand and was either a great prank by my fellow counselors or too scary to imagine. This was on a Friday morning, and we always released the campers late Friday afternoon to go home, and they were our last campers for the season. I was ready to get out of there and go home. I was over it and tired of the pranks, or what I thought were pranks. I had to go back to the craft house that evening to begin some cleanup, and when I walked in the front door, I was greeted by a huge rattlesnake on the floor. And he was pissed, a seriously pissed off rattlesnake. I quickly closed the door and turned around to leave and get some help. Mad that someone had probably left the side door open for a stupid snake to get in. When I turned around, I got that prickly feeling you get when someone is staring you down. I had goosebumps all down my arms, and I got that shot of adrenaline that your body knows means it's about to be fight or flight time. I looked up at the top of the ridge for some reason known only to God, and I saw him. He was standing at the top looking down on me. I could see his silhouette in the setting sun, and the jerk was laughing at me. Laughing. I was standing there pissed, scared, and in shock. He actually was laughing at me, and I could hear it. He then shouted down to ask if I liked his surprise. I had enough at that point and took off. I don't think I have ever run that fast in my life. I got to the director's office, and she believed me this time. She got the authorities out there, and they searched around. Of course nothing was found. Not a damn thing. Just one very mad rattlesnake. I left the camp that night, as did everyone else. We normally stayed for a week afterwards cleaning up and getting the camp ready for the winter, but no one stayed after that. I have never been back there, and the camp was shut down shortly after that. I don't think anyone else was ever bothered. He seemed to reserve that funny business for me that summer. I know they still do group camping out there and use the place for events, but no more summer camp. I pay more attention now, needless to say, and I doubt I will ever let my children attend a summer camp. The Louisiana lowlands. I often sit and think of my time growing up outside of New Orleans. Living in a place of such diversity, both human and natural, is bound to create unforgettable experiences. These memories range along a sliding scale from euphoric to downright frightening. I could tell you about the time that my neighbors accused me of wearing a mask and peeping in their windows at night. Apparently their son, my age, about 13 then, swears that someone looks in their window every night. I became somewhat of a pariah until my neighbors caught the person who was actually peeping in their windows. I could tell you about the time that my father got the phone bill that had upwards of $1,000 in phone charges on it. Needless to say, as the only son, I was the accused. After a week or so of proclaiming my innocence, my father calls the phone company only to discover that the calls were all made while we were out of town on vacation. That isn't creepy except that with further investigation we discovered that someone had broken into our house to do it. This story is about something even creepier, at least to me. Our neighborhood was on the outskirts of a suburb of New Orleans. We were effectively the last bastion of humanity before the 70,000-acre Honey Island swamp. In fact, our house was the last row of houses before the wilderness began. The rear of our house faced into the fringe of shrubbery and brambles that was the doorway to this pristine and largely unexplored wilderness. I spent many days exploring an ever-increasing concentric circle of this jungle. It was amazing to a young boy who fancied himself a soldier and, in fact, grew up to be one. Always at my side was my trusty dog, a golden retriever who was a year older than me. He was my parents' first child. He was very old but still very spry. He would never let me out of his sight. After about a year or so of exploration, my domain had expanded to about a mile in any direction from my backyard. Due to the terrain, the marshy land, and the sometimes thick undergrowth, even getting that far out sometimes took a hike of a couple hours. Summer was nearing an end, and I decided to push farther out. I wanted to wake up early, pack a little lunch, and see how far I could go. So, I did. My trusty dog, a bag lunch, and I began out one morning right after dawn. By mid-morning we were breaching into territory that I had not seen. We came upon a finger of shallow stagnant river, covered in green algae. It took about an hour to find a relatively easy crossing. We waded through the muck and ended up sitting down under a sprawling oak tree, the first patch of dry land that we could find, to dry out and eat some of the snacks I had taken along. We didn't rest long before I looked around to find that I wasn't exactly sure which way I had come from. That bothered me a bit, but more concerning was the fact that the sky was turning black as the not so unusual summer thunderstorm was rolling in. The standard noises of the marsh had stopped. There were no more insects humming or chirping, no more tree frogs croaking, only the sound of the rising wind in the foliage. Nature knew that it was time to find shelter, and I was feeling a bit lost in the swamp. We packed up and pushed on, looking for something familiar to help me get my bearings. Unlike Tennessee, where I now reside, Louisiana is so flat that orienteering in the wilderness is almost impossible. We walked for about another 10 to 15 minutes in a direction that felt generally like it was back towards home, and then we came upon a clearing. This clearing was obviously man-made due to the chop marks on tree stumps, but there was no obvious ingress or egress for wheeled vehicles. When I say clearing, I really mean that the underbrush and saplings were cleared. The tree canopy was very much unbroken. This gave the area a somewhat cathedral-type feeling, with only the trunks of massive live oaks standing like pillars. As I made my way around this anomaly, I got a very bad feeling. I start to notice animal bones strewn about. I notice that the whole place has an odd smell. In the middle of this clearing are 3 crosses made from timber lashed together. The crosses were charred and appeared to have recently been burned. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I froze in my tracks. The bottom drops out of the sinister clouds overhead. This was the type of pouring rain that can't be described to someone who has never experienced it. It feels like a wall of water, with raindrops so large that they splash rather than pelt. I'm slowly backing away from the clearing and call my dog, who had wandered off to chew on a bone that was lying about. He doesn't come, but I call him again, yelling loudly to overcome the crescendo of noise that the rain and the foliage are making in unison. As soon as the last syllable leaves my lips, a figure steps out from behind a tree about 100 yards away. The rain makes details at that distance almost imperceptible, but I swear to you he was wearing a tall, peaked white hood and gown. I could feel the figure's eyes searing into me through the black holes cut in his garment. I felt evil around me. I froze. I didn't know what to do, but as soon as he lunged forward as if he was about to sprint in my direction, my body took over. I ran. I ran with such force that I made it out of the clearing and into the brambles faster than seemed humanly possible. I reached the green algae-covered finger of the river, and instead of finding a crossing, I dove in. I ran until I couldn't run. I ran until my body was soaked with sweat and rain. I ran until I realized that I was totally lost and my dog was nowhere nearby. His old legs couldn't have kept up with me this long in a dead sprint. I didn't stop running for what seemed like hours. About dusk the rain stopped, and my run had turned to more of a clumsy stumbling. Call it luck, but right at about the time that the panic of being lost was about to set its icy claws in me, I came upon a 2-lane asphalt road. Surprisingly, I recognized this stretch of road and knew that I was about 2 miles from my house. I made my way home and breathlessly told my parents what I had experienced. I don't think they believed me, but they were very concerned about why our dog wasn't with me. For several tense days I canvassed the neighborhood hoping that he would find me. We called the animal shelters and vets' offices, hoping that if someone picked him up, they would call us. He showed up at our house almost a week after we had parted ways. I ran up to him and hugged him. The old boy collapsed when we got inside. He was dirty and matted with filth. He smelled awful, but there he was, and I was never happier. The strangest thing about it all wasn't his weight loss, as that would be completely explainable with him having to forage for food in the wilderness. It was that he was missing an eye. That is no metaphor or euphemism, he was quite literally missing his left eye. I didn't notice at first because he was so covered in muck, but somehow he had lost an eye. It's a happy ending of sorts. We took him to the vet, who examined him and proclaimed that he probably got it poked out by a branch or stick as he was running through the woods. The vet acted like that sort of injury wasn't terribly unusual. He lived for another year or so, and we buried our faithful companion at the age of 15. About 20 years later, I still feel regret for leaving him behind as I ran, and I still get goosebumps picturing that man in the hood and cloak lunging towards me in the pouring rain deep in the Louisiana woods. The bottom of the canyon. In 2011, my uncle invited me on a trip with him and my 2 cousins. We stayed a night in Vegas, then rented an RV for a trip through Utah and Arizona. Our final destination was the Grand Canyon. We spent a few days driving around to all of the tourist destinations, such as Eagle Point. Our nights were spent in RV parks that we found along the way. On our final leg of the trip, we headed to the Havasupai Indian Reservation. We got some really awesome photos and went on a thoroughly interesting tour. On the last night, we were driving around looking for an RV park to sleep in. We didn't want to rough it on the side of a road because it would be freezing cold and we needed to empty the sewage tank. Unfortunately, our phones were giving us problems due to a poor signal. My uncle was tired of driving and determined that we would have to pull over. We took this opportunity to stretch out and stargaze. The stars looked beautiful in the night sky. We were in an incredibly rural, unpopulated area. There were hardly any other cars or people. As a result, there was no light pollution, and the stars glowed intensely. On one side of the long dirt road was a steep hill with boulders and shrubs. On the other side, the canyon. To our surprise, the darkness was broken by high beams coming toward us. A car was slowly cruising down the road. The driver pulled over next to us and got out. He was a Native American man, and he told us he was a local. His hat nearly covered his eyes, and his beard grew over his mouth. We greeted him respectfully and asked if he knew of any RV parks. He said we were reasonably far from the tourist areas and that there were none over here. He asked us how we got here, and we told him that we were driving aimlessly in hopes that we would find an RV park. He laughed and started to tell us about the part of the canyon that we were standing next to. He sounded like a tour guide spewing out facts. He offered to take us down an unmarked trail that only the locals hiked. He said it had beautiful, scenic spots. Beguiled by his backstory and knowledge, we agreed to follow him. He got some hiking gear from his car and urged us to gather some of our own. We climbed into our RV and gathered our stuff. As I put on my boots, I watched him circle our RV through the window. He led us down the road a quarter of a mile when we were ready. We reached his fabled location, and he shined his flashlight off the edge of the cliff to show us the path. I knew this wasn't an official trail, but it didn't look like a trail at all. We followed him down an incredibly steep bank with tons of loose rocks. He led us around a few turns and through several tight caverns. We found ourselves on a big, flat rock, and we stopped to take some pictures. He led us deeper and deeper into the canyon. "Want to go to the bottom?" he asked us. It was dark and we were worn out, so we declined. We kept following him for about 10 minutes. We saw a few birds eating a small animal along the way. It struck me that we were truly in the untouched wilderness. We were uncomfortably close to the edge of the cliff many times. My uncle grew a bit uneasy and asked him to lead us back. He agreed and told us that he knew of a shortcut back up from where we were. He told us to wait there and disappeared out of sight. We were all a bit nervous at this point because we had no idea where we were. We waited about 10 minutes, taking more photos to pass the time. Eventually, my uncle walked off in the direction the man left. My cousins and I were afraid to be alone, so we trailed him tensely. He came back and told us that he didn't see the man. We waited another 10 minutes before giving up. "He's not coming back," my uncle told us. I began to wonder what could have happened to him. Did he fall? Did he get lost? Did he ditch us? I couldn't understand why he would have left us there. He seemed so friendly, and we were oddly eager to trust him. We started to hike back to whence we came. The problem was nobody remembered exactly where we came from. The terrain was incredibly unsafe, and we realized that we could not navigate it on our own. My uncle called out a few times, but the only response was his own echo. We found ourselves testing ridges that we were certain we hadn't come across before. Foot placement was key, as many rocks were wobbly. My little cousin started to cry, and we had to hold onto her jacket. It felt like we were lost in a labyrinth. My uncle remarked over and over that he knew it was a bad idea, but it was too late now. Since the route was not a real trail, there were no markings to help us. The only source of light came from our flashlights. I tried not to look over the ledge. We were incredibly high up. I didn't want to be in the back of the pack, but I wasn't prepared to lead it either. I just wanted to be back in the RV. Our anxiety was building as the moon sank. We joked that we could survive a night in the canyon since my cousin was an Eagle Scout. However, we were merely trying to take our minds off of the situation. Finally, we found ourselves on the big, flat rock. We recognized the series of caverns we crossed through and climbed back out. It was such a relief to be back on the dirt road. We walked towards our RV, searching for the man as we staggered on. We came upon our RV, but the man's car was gone. He left us. We quickly put the pieces together. We were angry and felt incredibly foolish. As I got closer to our RV, I noticed that the door was creaked open. I remembered locking it when we left. Immediately, tears began to build up in my eyes. I wasn't sure if the adrenaline had gotten the best of me or if I truly had a reason to be afraid. "Hold on," my uncle said as he swung the door open. My cousins and I were too afraid to go inside, but we were not particularly content being outside either. My uncle took a few steps into the RV and blurted out, "Guys, we have been robbed." We piled into the RV and froze. None of us wanted to venture too deep in. I began thinking of all the stuff I had stored in there. Our suitcases were thrown on the floor, and the clothing was scattered. My iPad was gone, my uncle's wallet was gone, my cousin's jewelry was gone, and my other cousin's phone was gone, amongst other things. I felt so violated. We were all quiet, and none of us slept. My uncle started the RV, and we drove off, looking for civilization. Fortunately, we had enough gas to make it back to the RV rental place. We phoned the police, and they filled out a report, but nothing ever came of it. My word of advice: if someone asks you to go to the bottom of the canyon, say no. Nature Trail Creeper. 3 years, and change, ago, my friend and I were walking this local nature trail at night. The reason for us being out there so late was to try and get some night vision shots of the local wildlife, deer, fox, groundhogs, possums, etc., with my friend's super fancy, new camera. We are both semi-serious outdoorsmen. My friend has hiked Mount Washington and the Adirondack High Peaks, for example, and we've done extended survival camping trips together, so walking a nature trail bordered by houses and streets was basically nothing for us. As we ambled along, mostly neglecting to take pictures in favor of talking about horror stories and movies in an attempt to creep each other out, a man suddenly walked out of the trees and onto the trail, about 50 yards ahead of us. He was wearing white coveralls that shone in the moonlight, extremely cliché, I know, but it was dark enough that I couldn't make out his face. Now, there are homeless people that live on this particular nature trail, as it borders a well-trafficked highway that connects two large cities. I've met a few of them before, and they were amiable enough, mostly looking to keep to themselves. This guy, though, he just stood there and stared at us. I whispered to my friend that we should probably head back when this guy charged at us. My friend turned to me and yelled, "Let's get this mother ducker." So we began to run at him. He stopped in his tracks, yelled, and then ran back into the woods. At that point, we both were anxious as hell and jacked up on adrenaline. I grabbed my friend and said, "Let's get the duck out of here." We ended up running out of the woods through someone's backyard, laughing our anxiety away. We ran all the way back to my car. Neither of us are tough guys, but we are both big goons who aren't much for backing down. Still, I'm glad no one was hurt. No clue what that guy's problem was. Stranger danger. This will be a combo story because the first story helped me make the decisions I ultimately made in the second story. The first story isn't in the woods, and I apologize. This happened when I was young, maybe 9 to 10 years old. I lived in a small town of fewer than 1,000 people in the county. Our property was about 4 acres at a T on an old gravel road. The gravel road was access to other areas around the lake we lived on, but the left side of the T to our property wasn't ever used because it was a dead end. No one would accidentally go down it to turn around because there was a large gravel patch you could use to turn around at the top of the T. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard someone's shoes stepping on the porch and up to the front door. I thought it was strange that I didn't hear my dad's truck come up the driveway, but who else would be coming onto our porch? I walked over to the door, and my mother, who was in the kitchen doing dishes, quickly shut off the water and stopped me before I touched the door. She quietly, almost silently, mouthed, "Get down," so I did just that and crawled on the ground away from the door, the living room window, and into the hallway before I stood up again. I watched my mom like a hawk and noticed she was tense and very serious. She's never firm or authoritative, but the way she commanded me, I knew something was wrong. She knew my dad wouldn't have come home that early that day and my grandmother would have called ahead of time. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. My mom answered, asking who it was. It was some guy asking to use the phone. This is the late 90s, so having a cell phone was still pretty rare. My mom said she wouldn't let him in and to try the neighbor a mile or so down the road. The guy said his truck ran out of gas and he needed to call for a ride. Mom told the guy she could call a ride for the guy if needed. The guy continued, "Is your husband around?" I thought this was a weird thing to ask and even weirder when my mom said, "Yes, but he's sleeping." Again, what the hell was Mom saying? Dad wasn't home. Being a dumbass, I considered reminding her that no, Dad was not home. Thankfully I thought better of it. Don't interrupt when the grown-ups are talking. I could hear a truck motor turn on and rev at the edge of our driveway, at that T I was referring to. The guy got kind of agitated, saying it would only take a second. Mom insisted that she would not let the guy inside, and I remember the guy swearing something, can't remember what, and then the footsteps started down the porch and back off it again. After a few minutes, my mom was still at the door, listening. She had the cordless phone in her hand, I guess to either call Dad or the police. I didn't move from my spot because she really freaked me out. I didn't understand why it was such a big deal to let the guy inside. He needed help after all, but it was the way my mom was poised that I knew there was danger. Even as children, we noticed subtle cues from other people's bodies. I had that cliché hard in my throat moment while I waited to be given a task to perform or for Mom to stop being so ducking weird. A few minutes later I heard shouting, a couple expletives here and there, and then the truck drove away up the road toward the bottom of that T, away from us up the hill and toward the neighbor's house. I thought it was strange that the guy said he was out of gas, and then suddenly he could move his truck again. My mom gave me a good talking to about never answering the door for anyone I didn't know and never letting someone outside know that I was alone. That was my first stranger danger moment. It's possible the dude really did need to use the phone, but it's strange that his gas problem stopped and he left easily. Maybe he got the truck to turn over one last time to gun it up the hill and coast his way to the gas station. I won't ever know, haha. This leads me to my spooky woods story. I'm a bit scared of the dark, but it's a healthy fear, more afraid of what's in the dark than just the dark. We humans are quite useless in the dark after all. I was driving to a favorite camp spot for me and my wife. We discovered the place the year before and fell in love with it. We decided to go back, so we took the 6-hour ride over there. The road to get there is a moderately trafficked logging road. The potholes are worse in certain seasons, and we just had a really big rain, so there were a lot of small little waterfalls near the road, which had begun to erode small potholes into larger ones. I remember thinking, this is what soldiers would have to do to avoid being hit by bazookas or something, because I was all over the left and right side of the road avoiding potholes and junk. Despite how woodsy it seemed, there were quite a few other cars out there, the typical pull over and wave so they can pass through, and then continue your journey to the various campgrounds down the road. Our wreck site was at the very end of the road, so there were fewer and fewer vehicles as time went on. I had worked a day shift that day, so we didn't get to the recreation site until after midnight. The site was gated and locked. I remember being disappointed because sometimes they dummy lock the gate and don't close the padlock, so you can just unhinge the padlock and go in after hours, then put everything back in place as soon as you pull through. There wasn't any parking lot, and the wreck site was at the very end of the road for the most part. A very small section of the road continued into a small, grassy area. It looked like it could have been an overflow parking area but had never been paved and was completely overgrown. The slightly off-road grassy area looked like a nice place to park overnight until the gates opened. I did note that there was a lot of mud and worried I might get stuck. I saw an SUV parked there, lights on, engine revving, and vehicle rocking back and forth. I thought, well, duck, if he got stuck, I'm for sure getting stuck in my van. I pulled over just off the road, halfway in a ravine, halfway still on the road. My wife and I rearranged some items in the back so we could sleep comfortably. For a long time, we heard the SUV revving and rocking. My wife suggested we help them, but it gave me a weird feeling. I felt deeply unsettled and pulled out my knife and one for my wife to sleep with. I told her to keep it close. There wasn't any cell service where we were, so the best bet for some help would be waiting until morning to get someone from the wreck site with a chain to help tow the SUV out. The wreck site was a bit of a hike from the gate, maybe a half-hour walk or so in the pitch black. I felt a bit cruel being so distrustful and assuming the worst, but I wanted us to be safe. I told her not to respond if anyone tried to come in the car and to fight hard if anyone managed to break inside the car. I lie there wondering why the people in the SUV didn't just stop and go to sleep for the night. It's not like their car would completely sink. At best, they would be doing themselves a favor by quitting spinning their tires. They were just, figuratively and literally, digging a deeper hole for themselves. It felt like they spun those tires for another 10 minutes before they finally stopped. I could still see their headlights, they hadn't moved. I stayed awake for about 30 minutes, listening for footsteps, listening for voices. I don't know why I was so paranoid. I remember thinking it was weird they kept their lights on so long, it couldn't have been good for their car battery. I eventually set up a minor screen on all of the windows using bungee cords and clothes for privacy and then fell asleep with my knife concealed in my hand under my blanket. We woke up early the next morning, and the gate was open. Before we stepped out of the van, we checked the clearing in the woods where we saw the SUV. They didn't seem to be there. I assumed they had gotten help and went on into the wreck site, but I was curious how they could have gotten stuck so bad. The soil leading up to where I saw the SUV was relatively solid. It probably had been a dirt or lightly graveled road at some point, but if the SUV slipped into an area that wasn't road prepped in the past, it could have been entirely possible for them to get stuck. I was a little creeped out that I didn't see any track marks leaving the flattened area near the ditch area that I saw the headlights at. There was just forest everywhere else. One would have to come out the way they came in to leave. The grass was long and thick, and I couldn't see any track marks at all. There weren't any upturned soil or tire holes anywhere. There wasn't even a sign that a car had been in the area. As I left to return to my wife, I noticed that even as I was leaving, I was causing small bends and strains in the grass. If anyone had walked through, they would have left a disturbance. I'd like to imagine it was a shared hallucination, but it was awfully detailed and drawn out. It gave me the same feeling I had when I tried to open the door for that stranger and Mum told me to foresee a threat. It's a bit strange when more than one person experiences the same incident as you. We were both like, what the duck? But continued to the wreck site and enjoyed our vacation. We talked about it a couple times about how weird it was that there wasn't any evidence at all that someone had been in the area when we so very clearly saw and heard it. Made me feel a little insane, to be honest. If my wife didn't experience it too, I probably would have believed I imagined it all due to fatigue and paranoia. I was chased through the midnight sun by an armed militia. Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. Alaska, being the least populated state in America, provides ample privacy from authorities and prying eyes. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirt back road with nothing else for miles around, heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers in the sides of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. You can find all of this and more in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in a city. It takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across, so that gives you an idea for what we up north consider a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. These two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It's a 7-hour drive one way to get between them through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up on either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park before you drive through these colossal canyons, carved out of the rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast, flat, interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska, even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built tough attitude I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip into the mountains up past Talkeetna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it's like. It gets to about dusk, and that's it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night through. Shout out to readers in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security I had, thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety, probably nearly got me killed or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at Subway for lunch, and headed out into the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you are still connected to civilization in some way. This led me to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee and was too scared to risk the fine, so I found a spot that looked good and pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. Pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed my map and compass, and started off into the woods. Now this hadn't been the first time I had done this. I've been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad throughout my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was, or so I thought. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills, and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there. Just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off in the woods and set to building a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here you're supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp just in case bears are nosy. The last thing you want is a 1,300 pounds grizzly poking his nose in your tent wondering why you smell like Campbell's soup and s'mores. By this time it was getting late, about 10 p.m., but the sun was still high in the sky, and by the time dinner was over it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke to voices in the distance and slow-moving crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident and closed my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightish forest, "Who the duck is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had ducked up and was getting up, grabbing my purse, and putting on my shoes so I could go apologize before I heard the man again. "When we find you, we will kill you. You're on private militia property, and trespassers get shot." That's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent and shit with some armed guy lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse, and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until they got bored and left, then go back, pack up, and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot, before I heard a second voice calling for the others. They had found my tent and were tearing it apart, going through my stuff. I heard one shout out, "The bed's still warm, and the trespasser's a chick. She left her underwear." The first man shouted out, "Okay, fan out and find her. She thinks she can trespass, then there's going to be hell to pay." At that point I wasn't concerned that I had left my spare change of underwear in my bag or that these creeps had found it. I needed to get out of there. Quietly I made my way down the mountain for a good 30 minutes, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said, "Duck it," and booked it as fast as I could in the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell and got scraped up more times than I'd care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew I had emerged either up or down the road from my previous location. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but I picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car. And the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and watched. A while later several more men appeared from the trail I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car, hopped back on their ATVs, and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this a warning." I went back to start loading stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They'd cut up or destroyed all of my gear, probably as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I didn't get shot. Ever since then I have taken special care to camp only in designated camping areas. Creepy encounter during a late night walk. A couple months back, I was up late playing video games. It was about 3:30 a.m. I had been playing for several hours at that point and started to feel restless from sitting for so long, so I decided I'd go for a walk. I live just outside of a relatively small and quiet town in Ireland, and being a grown-ass man in my 20s, I figured I didn't have any reason to fear being out for a walk this late at night and have done so plenty of times in the past. I put on my jacket, grabbed my headphones, and started out on my usual path, following the road outside of my house and onto a bypass on the edge of town. The air was crisp and refreshing, the road was well lit from the streetlights, and it seemed like it was going to be a pleasant walk. The bypass features a footpath on one side that is situated on a slight hill, making it slightly elevated above the road. A small wooded area, which is near pitch black at night, borders the footpath. I was looking down at my phone, contemplating what song I wanted to play next, when I noticed the legs of a person whom I almost walked into. I was caught off guard since just moments ago I had been looking ahead of me and hadn't seen anyone at all. I glanced up to see an older man in a brown coat. He looked to be in his 70s and was a bit shorter than me with an unreadable expression on his face. He says something that I barely hear through my headphones, but I thought I heard him say something like doggy. Assuming this man was simply out looking for a lost pet, I took off my headphones and said, "I haven't seen any dogs, sorry." He then repeats what he said. His voice was high-pitched with a strong accent, and I still couldn't make out what he was saying despite now lacking my headphones, but the final word became more clear. "Daddy." I asked him to repeat himself, turning my ear to him and leaning in slightly closer to hear him better. It was only now I had noticed a strong petrol smell coming off of him. He breathed in sharply and spoke again. This time I was able to make out what he was saying. "Are you my daddy?" I didn't know how to react to that. Part of me saw some humor in the scenario. I'm a third his age, and he's asking if I'm his dad. The other part of me was a mixture of confused and uneasy. After a moment of confused silence, I said, "No, do you need help finding someone?" I really wanted to just keep walking, but what if this clearly disoriented old man genuinely needed help? After another sharp inhale, he says, "Where's my daddy?" Still uneasy about this whole thing, I tell him I don't know and ask where he last saw whoever it is he was searching for. He pauses for a second, then points into the dark wooded area. I looked over where he was pointing, but it was far too dark to see anything. I start to think about how to proceed with this situation when I notice his face turn into a scowl as he grumbles something, and he reaches into his pocket and takes out what looks like some wet rolled up fabric. Upon closer inspection, however, I realized it was actually a small dead bird. He looks at it, grumbles again, then looks back at me. I was trying to decide if I should call someone or just go. All I knew was that I wasn't equipped to deal with this. I looked down at my phone, then snap. A noise like a large twig breaking happens to my right in the wooded area, followed by a very distinct and human shushing noise. Every alarm in my body is going off now. I quickly say, "I don't think I can help you," and start walking fast towards the town, which turned into a full-on sprint when I hear footsteps emerging from the trees behind me. As I reach the crossing, I glance back to see a hefty bald man guiding the older guy into the trees while staring over at me. A beam of light from a torch is now piercing through the wooded area. I cut through town and ran back home. Looking back, it's hard to say if I was in any actual danger or if I just stumbled upon a mentally ill old guy who had gotten out of his house. I checked the news for a couple days afterwards to see if there was anything on a missing elder in my town but came up with nothing. I haven't seen him since, nor have I heard anyone I know mention anything about a creepy old guy. Anyways, thanks for letting me share my weird encounter. If you're interested, I can go back to the bypass I was on and take some pictures of it. Scottish Highlands. Annie and I were both 22 or 23 and in college in different cities. When we were kids, her family and mine used to go on hiking/camping trips every year, and through high school and uni, I and Annie kept up the tradition. We did bits and pieces of the West Highland Way every year for a catch-up, took some climbing shoes, and hung about a bit in the wilderness. We usually do it at the start of summer, but this year we were both snowed under with work and exams and stuff and couldn't get the time off. But by the time we both had enough days spare, it was mid-October. I was hesitant about heading right up into the highlands that late in the year and said we should just miss it, and she just laughed at me and told me to grow a pair. So, October it was. You don't really argue with Annie. We met at a train station about halfway up and aimed for a 3-day hike. To be honest, I was kind of excited, even though I knew it would probably suck. I really love Annie, and I miss her when we're away. I saw her purple waterproofs, she dropped her bag, we hugged and started walking, chatting away about life, etc., etc. This was the year she had her first placements. She's a doctor, a something-trician. Consultant, anyway, which is why she couldn't get time off. And I just restarted uni and was trying to get a flat sorted. Either way, we were chatting for hours while we walked. But if it were anyone else, I'd be having the worst time. Scottish weather is shite. I don't know if anyone has been here in winter, but it sucks. Especially later in the year. It gets dark by about 4 p.m., and it chucks it down all day every day, apart from the days where it's moody and overcast and crappy. Or snowing. We've got a Scots word for it, dreek. Dark, shitty weather, can't see a thing, everyone's miserable. It was absolutely pissing it down, and in the end we just gave up. By the time we met at the station it was about 10 a.m., and we forgot it got dark early, so by the time the sun set we'd only gotten about halfway to the place we usually stop. We hiked along a bit further until I'd had enough and told her I wasn't up for going any further and it'd be cool if we just wild camped. Or, as she puts it, I said, "Annie, put the ducking tent up. I'm ducking soaked." I don't ducking care, so we shove the tent up on the first flat bit we find, struggling in the dark, then climb in. The next morning, we wake up. And we find out we'd pitched the tent in the bog, about 2 feet from the burn, and literally everything was soaking wet. On top of that, we were miles and miles from the next train station. So we pack up, raging, and keep going. We discuss it a bit, more of me going I'm ducking soaked, and in the end decide to head for a bothy we knew was nearby, which at least had shelter. If you don't know what a bothy is, it's basically an open shed thing that you can sleep in with a bunch of other hikers, get to know folk, and, importantly, not have to worry about where to wild camp. Also, it's free, so you're not stung by tourist hotel prices. We pick up the pace a lot and don't really stop for food or anything, because it's all damp and sad anyway. Having left at 9 a.m., we get there for 3 p.m. when the sun starts to set. It's dark and a bit grotty, but there's nobody else there, so we feel like we've scored. By the time we've got dinner and played some torchlight cards, she's looking a bit spaced, so she heads off to sleep early. I'm knackered and damp, and I'm so ducking glad to be somewhere dry. I just unpack my sleeping bag and do the same thing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I wake up to Annie having a seizure. It's not a big deal, this happens a lot, so I didn't need to call an ambulance or anything. I just jump out of my sleeping bag and undo hers so she doesn't hurt herself. I sort of cushion her a bit with her fleece and keep an eye on her. She gets over the worst of it, and she's lying there quiet while I'm talking to her as she comes round. At this point, I glanced up and noticed that sometime after we'd gone to bed, someone else had come into the bothy. There was a dark red bundle of sleeping bags in the corner and a rucksack, and Annie's fit had woken whoever was in there. This guy was coming over to us. He seemed nice enough and genuinely worried about her. "Do you need any help?" he asks. I don't get a chance to look him over, because I'm juggling making sure Annie's okay and making sure this guy doesn't call mountain rescue and make us look like tits. No, she's okay. It happens all the time. She's medicated and things, it just happens. She'll be okay in a bit. Sure? Honestly. Cheers for the help, but we can't really do anything. He comes closer, and he starts helping. Not in a way that immediately alerts me, but in an annoying way. He starts trying to put her in a recovery position, which I'd already done, and even though I'd told him 100 times I've known her since I was 5 and I know what I'm doing, he didn't listen. He's breathing really heavily, and he smells a bit moldy. Eventually, I just tell him to back off a bit and give her some space. And then he smiles at me. Which was weird and creepy and, in the half-dark, sort of wrong because it didn't meet his eyes. This guy looks off as well. He's got his massive, huge ducking beard like he lives out here and a weird accent. Sort of Scottish, but sort of something else as well. I thought he was maybe an oil rigger or something. I've met a few in Aberdeen, and he seemed to fit the bill. His eyes were really, really dark, and his face was so pale he made me look tanned. Also, who the duck is still hiking in this weather, this late? Who gets to a bothy, alone, after 6 p.m? He moves closer again to look at Annie, and then I tell him more firmly that I've got her, and I don't need help. I feel like I'm being a bit mean, but I'm starting to get stressed out because I can't see properly and Annie's been out for ducking ages. By now it's getting on to 15 or 20 minutes. It shouldn't take this long for her to come round. It's usually at least half this. Also, I notice she's got her eyes open, which isn't that unusual, but I'm almost 90% sure she didn't when she started fitting. Then I notice she's looking at me. Not zoned out or anything, but actually looking at me. It takes me a few seconds, but I realize she is. "Lauren," she whispers, hardly moving her lips. She doesn't really blink either, but her eyes are looking right at mine. Don't react. I don't know why, but I'm so scared I just do as I'm told. She said once she had this patient who used to talk bollocks after a fit, like they were hallucinating. So a part of me thinks she's doing the same, but another part of me has noticed that she's now staring over my shoulder. Where the red sleeping bag man was. I go to slowly turn around, but she grabs my hand. I'd put her in the recovery position, but from where she's lying, she's able to sort of squeeze my hand without moving too much. So I freeze, keeping looking at her, and then keep my voice at a normal volume. I don't know what else to do, so keep talking to her. Saying, "Annie, it's me. Can you hear me?" All of that stuff. Then, her eyes flicker back to me, and she whispers again. She's basically mouthing it. If I didn't know her looks, I would have struggled. "Lauren, ask him for help. Don't panic." Okay. Weird. Really ducking scared now. So I slowly let go of her hand and turn around. And that's when I see what she's been looking at. The red sleeping bag man had been sitting in a corner watching us, still smiling. Only now he's got something in his hand under his jacket. I thought he'd got climbing gear with him, but all I can see is rope and no harnesses or anything. And it's not climbing tape he's got, it's a massive roll of something darker. He's just staring at us, waiting. I don't know what else to do. So, I move an inch or so away from her and look the guy right in his creepy eyes. "Hi. Sorry, mate, can you please give me a hand?" She's not waking up. I'm really scared. He doesn't even move. I can feel my voice shake, not acting or anything. I'm genuinely shitting it. I remember before when he was helping me that he kept trying to touch her hair and things, so in a moment of blind panic I asked if he could move her hair out of her face so I could check if she was breathing. I don't know why. I'm not as smart as she is, but I've seen too many crime thrillers and sort of assumed it'd be a psychology thing. Maybe he liked that she was vulnerable? Whatever. It worked. He gets up, dead slowly, and moves towards us. He puts his hand on her hair and starts really smiling. I can hear him breathing. It's really scaring the duck out of me. Especially when he leans close and says, "You're going to be my favorite." Annie has her eyes closed now. I put my hand in hers, and then I can feel it. She's squeezing. Not like calm down, it's okay squeezing, but steady. 3. Then 2. Then 1. And at 1, she opens her eyes and swings for him at the same time I do. Punches him right in the throat, and from where I'm sitting I can get him square in the groin. She decks him again, like a ducking boss, because she's a Highlander, and I automatically grab his rope. He's not exactly going down without a fight, but between us we've got hiking sticks, massive boots, elbows, and adrenaline, and in about a minute we get him tied and taped up. We grab our shit and get outside as fast as humanly possible, then do something I never thought I'd ever see Annie do in my life: call mountain rescue. They come get us in about an hour, and when we get to town, we give a full statement to the police, making sure we didn't get done for GBH. A few months later, we find out they let the ducker go. He didn't actually do anything to us, according to the police, and there wasn't enough evidence to tie him to any other assaults. Which is the worst part of this, because I can't even imagine what would happen if we didn't get as lucky. If Annie hadn't sussed him, he'd have attacked us in our sleep.